Of August 3rd, 2011 of the Oregon City Commission. Would you please join me in the flag salute?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
We have a series of ceremonies, proclamations, and presentations, starting with the attendance court. Lieutenant James Ban, Larry Didway, the Oregon City School District Superintendent, and Bill Stewart, District Attorney's Office. Are you all going to speak? Larry,
take your
end. Speaker, but Lieutenant Ban will come up here and hold his hand. And welcome. You are officially the superintendent at this point?
I am, indeed.
Congratulations. Very excited.
When did this occur?
July 1st.
July 1st.
Yeah.
Well,
it was a furlough day.
It was a furlough.
Very appropriate.
That's the absolute truth. Yes. All right. Well, thank you very much for welcoming us here today. As Mayor Neely said, I'm Larry Didway, and I'm the superintendent for Oregon City School District. And I've had the great privilege of working with a number of people that are here tonight as we have collaborated on a project that we very much appreciate support from Oregon City as a municipality. So I want to share with you just a little bit about what that pilot project is over the next year, and welcome any questions that we can answer here tonight. Here at the dais with me is Lieutenant Jim Band, and I think you probably already know him well. And also in the audience is with us is Judge Lorraine McNeil, and as well, I said McNeese, pardon me, and also with us is Bill Stewart from the District Attorney's Office. And there are two high school vice principals with us here. One of them, Kathy Johnson, and Gardner Middle School vice principal, Cindy Borgmeyer. Unable to be with us here tonight is the principal at Mount Pleasant Elementary School, Carol Kemmis, and she's also going to be a part of this pilot project. So the project includes both the city police department and the city municipal court, as well as those three schools that I shared with you. And we have been meeting, outlining what we would implement called for attendance court. And it's based on the statutory authority that's given to the school district and the municipality to actually enforce the duty of all parents to send their children to school. And I've outlined the ORS there. It applies only to students who are 7 to 18 years old, and it's a Class C violation. It's not a felony or a misdemeanor. It's a violation. And we're basing our program on a model that's been piloted in Clackamas County already, beginning at North Clackamas School District, but also expanded to Molalla School District and Estacada School District. And basically, it's just providing support to students, recognizing the link between attendance and achievement. It begins with identifying students who have 8 or more days of unexcused absence and sending a letter. That's the first intervention. The letter is coming to the student family. It's actually addressed to the parent. It's not the student that is responsible for that violation. It is actually the parent. And that letter is on stationery that includes the seal of Oregon City School District and the Oregon City Police Department. If that is not a successful intervention and there are further unexcused absences, there's a second letter, and that's where our partnership comes in. The police department actually personally delivers that letter. And that letter also directs the family to attend a mandatory attendance meeting at the school level. If that intervention doesn't work, there's the third intervention, and that's a citation that is actually issued by the Oregon City Police Department, and that does require a court appearance. The court appearance really gives them 3 options. They can ask for a trial, they can plead guilty and pay a fine, or they can defer the sentence option, which is what most in the other pilot projects have chosen to do. And that allows them, after 30 days of perfect attendance, to have that complete citation dismissed. If they do have further attendance problems, there is a citation issued, and it does have a $242 fine assessed to it. I will share with you that at the very beginning I thought this sounded a little harsh, and I wasn't so sure that I wanted to sign on to such a thing. But Bill Stewart, who was very instrumental in having this piloted in North Clackamas School District, shared with us some pretty impressive statistics that sold me on the veracity of this as a effective intervention for chronic attendance issues. In Milwaukee High School, for example, in 2008-09, they went from an 87% attendance rate to a 93% rate and in just 1 year. And if you look at this triangle here, you can see they've kind of tiered their interventions. They began with kids with attendance issues, with having almost 400 kids, referred to what's called a care team. We have similar processes. And they identified from them about 95 of those kids that really this kind of intervention wasn't really appropriate. There was something else going on, and it was handled in another way. Of those left, there were about 300, that received that first letter. And this is where I was sold. Of just that one letter with the stationery, 200 of those, the attendance problem was solved. So then, with about 110 from that second letter, then they attended a mandatory attendance meeting, and there were other interventions developed. And out of those, all but 25, the attendance issue was solved. And so it was really only 25 that received that truancy citation. And of those 25 that received that truancy citation, only 2 resulted in a fine. So those are the statistics that kind of swayed me away from feeling like it was a little heavy hammer, and I began to see this as something that we really had a responsibility to implement, knowing that we could have that kind of an impact on chronic attendance issues. So they expanded that from Milwaukee to, as I said earlier, Molalla and I believe Estacada now too. And you can see from this that just out of about 1,000 of those who received that first letter, they were able to whittle it down to only 49 receiving a citation and only 6 of those being fined throughout the county in these pilot projects. So we have excitedly signed on to this partnership. We very much appreciate the involvement of Oregon City Police Department and the Municipal Court and Judge McNeese. And the elements of success that I've outlined here, or the Bill Stewart actually has outlined here for us, it really has to do with the school really committing itself to this. We have identified that one strand, attendance strand of Mount Pleasant to Gardner to the high school as being our first pilot, getting the kinks worked out, and then we hope to expand that district-wide. And then, of course, we very much appreciate the police department and the court signing on for that as well. Can we answer any questions for you?
Again, on the first scroll around there, you said it was 8 inexcused absences. Was that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Why that many?
Why that many? Yeah. Well, that's a good question. We selected that number only because that's typically a breaking point that this differentiates chronic attendance issues that are ongoing throughout the rest of the year. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other comments?
You know, I'll say a couple things
Sure.
just on behalf of the police department that I think that for us, I think that one of the things that when I heard the presentation initially by Mr. Stewart is that I think that we see as police officers quite a bit is where I think this is key is there's a lot of times maybe parents who are having a few problems sometimes with spirited kids or whatever you want to say, but you know, where they're having kind of a hard time maybe maintaining that level of control or authority in a house. And so in some ways I see this as beneficial in that we're kind of supporting parents in some ways of them doing what they're already trying to do. You know, part of that safety net that sometimes we end up being a part of, you know, the school does, the police, you know, several other people. Our intent, you know, the goal I think for us is to get compliance without, you know, having to cite anybody, but I think that you can't hold up that motivation and then never use the motivation when people, you know, it's got to be real, it's got to be a tangible motivation. And I guess the only other thing is I think that it could really be beneficial in that I think a lot of kids at a young age, what we see when kids start committing crimes, I think if they start learning to maybe, hopefully, follow the rules when they're in the shallow end of the pool, then they never get into the deep end of the pool where they're in bigger trouble. So I think it's a great thing, and I think we're all really happy we're doing it. So.
Good. Well, thank you. I don't know, District Attorney Stewart, do you have anything to say? Okay.
Well, I think it's great that you were all able to partner together and pull this together. I think it's going to make a great impact on the schools.
And again, I would really have to recognize Bill Stewart as a significant catalyst to that. We really appreciate the support and initiative he's taken on this partnership. Thank you.
Great. Thank
you
you.
so much.
Thank you.
This is the opportunity when I get to have sworn in oaths of office for a couple of police officers, and we'll make sure I have the right documents in my hand this time. Yes. And the chief wishes to come forward with me.
It's nice with the lights on.
And I'll let you make some introductions before we do the
Tonight, the mayor is going to swear in 2 reserve police officers, and reserve police officers are basically volunteer police officers. Typically, they work a full-time job, and because of a desire to serve the community, they volunteer to come out and help supplement the police department. And quite honestly, this is an invaluable service for the police department and the community. For example, last night during National Night Out over at Chapin Park, I'd say we probably had 500 or 600 people over there, and we had several reserve officers helping us out, including these 2 new officers tonight. A little bit of information on each one of them. Colin Munson, right here, is a reserve officer formerly with the Mount Angel Police Department, and he decided to come up here, I'm sure because of the wonderful things he heard about Oregon City Police Department in the community. Colin is a graduate of Western Oregon University and has a bachelor's degree in law enforcement. And Spencer Road was formerly with the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office Reserve Program, and he decided to come over here for, I'm sure, the same reasons that Colin did. Right, Spencer? Right? Okay. And Colin is a graduate of the University of Oregon. We're not going to hold that against him. With a degree in economics, I believe, right? Very good. Okay.
Very good, thank you. So, I'm going to speak lines, I'm going to repeat them, except when I say state your name, don't say state your name. But anyway, I, and state your name, Colin. Oh.
I, Colin,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will uphold the law
that I will uphold the law
and support the constitutions of the United States and the state of Oregon.
to uphold the constitutions of the United States and Oregon.
I will abide by the law enforcement code of ethics
I will abide by the law enforcement code of ethics
and the department's rules and regulations,
of the department's rules and regulations,
faithfully performing my duties as reserve officer
faithfully performing my duties as a reserve officer
for Oregon City, Oregon.
for Oregon City, Oregon.
Thank you. And then, Mr. Rode, Officer Rode, I
I, Spencer Rode,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will uphold the law and support the Constitution of the United States and the state of Oregon.
that I will uphold the law and support the Constitution of the United States and the state of Oregon.
I will abide by the law enforcement code of ethics
I will abide by the law enforcement code of ethics
and the department's rules and regulations,
and the department's rules and regulations,
while faithfully performing my duties of reserve officer for Oregon City, Oregon.
while faithfully performing my duties as a reserve police officer for Oregon City, Oregon.
Thank you, gentlemen. Welcome. I'll be passing, actually, we'll be passing these over to the city recorder, and we'll be getting them a little bit. Thank you. The next, we're going to have a presentation by Representative Dave Hunt on the legislative session that we were all watching, very interesting session. Are you going to talk about the real interesting part, or are you going to talk about other things?
I don't get to the part that you think is interesting. You can quiz me. Thanks, Mayor and Commissioners, for the opportunity to be here. I've got a handout that is coming around to you, which has far more information. I'm just going to hit on some highlights from the session I think are particularly relevant to Oregon City. Obviously, when you have a session with over 3,000 bills introduced, about 900 actually became law. You have a lot of things that are either not all that interesting or not all that relevant. So I'll try and zero in on several that I think are. Both those that I think were successful in passing, as well as those that fell up short, but I think need to continue to be pursued in the future. Obviously, this is a very different environment in Salem. When I was here 2 years ago, actually, we had just passed the Jobs and Transportation Act, a major $300 million a year investment, about 20% of it going to cities, 30% going to counties, and the rest going to state roads. We also, in 2009, had just passed the largest ever capital construction budget for the state, funding projects at Clackamas Community College and all 17, no, actually not all 17 schools, many of the community colleges and all the university campuses. And so that we've really seen the benefit of that. You see the benefit of that in jobs right down the jug handle, right down the hill. We're going to start to see the jobs from that 2009 action start to play out over the Sunrise Corridor when that first $100 million of investment goes in. So although we're seeing the implementation of that, this session, unfortunately, there were no new dollars approved at all for roads, literally zero new dollars. So we went from increasing from $300 million a year. We didn't touch, fortunately, we didn't touch any of the $300 million, although there were some folks that wanted to go after that money, because that money, as you may recall, did involve some fees. But fortunately, we were able to keep them off, and we're going to see the benefit of those dollars. The only new transportation dollars that came in, you'll see on the third bullet there under Jobs and the Economy, additional resources for Connect Oregon. We had done $100 million each of the three previous sessions. We were able to do $40 million, but no more this session. $40 million in additional new money. And that's really been a very successful program. Rail projects, marine projects, rural airports, really all across the state. They do it on a competitive bidding process, so projects in Clackamas County and elsewhere compete against other projects around the state. And it's been really beneficial in terms of linking up businesses with better ways to get their freight to market. We did also plus up the Special Public Works Fund with an additional $10 million. That's that revolving fund that is both grants and loans for local governments to deal with infrastructure. We also changed the terms of that, so if you're using those resources to build a project, previously the length of the bond could only be 25 years. It now can go out to 30 years if the project is going to last more than 30 years. It's 30 years or the length of the project, whichever is shorter. So I think that was a good positive change. Creating a one-stop shop for small businesses, which obviously Oregon City is replete with. Too often those small businesses have to go through all kinds of bureaucratic red tape at the state level. This is going to create in one place a place where they can online apply for everything they need to start up, deal with unemployment for employees, deal with workers' comp, deal with if they're trying to get financing, deal with all the issues related to starting up, expanding, growing. We also did some changes to the way farmers markets are regulated, and this ended up being very controversial because a lot of the big agricultural groups ended up coming out in opposition to this bill. Fundamentally, it's deregulating farmers markets, which actually seemed kind of like more of a Republican idea to me, but once all the big farm groups came out against it, the political tides on this one kind of got turned around. We were able to pass it, though, and I think it's going to be very beneficial. And obviously, we've seen the benefit of farmers markets in our community, and hopefully that will get easier for them. The bottle bill modernization passed. There's really, as you all are aware, there's really only been one significant change to the bottle bill in 40 years, and that was when we added water bottles in 2007. This is going to add on a whole new series of containers, so no longer will you have to look at the container and try and gauge what it looks like. And really, I think you're probably aware of how significant the center in Oregon City is in terms of the statewide vision. The one in Wood Village and the one in Oregon City are really setting the pace for the rest of the state. And that's going to become the model. And in fact, the success has been, and the feedback has been so positive about the Oregon City site and the Wood Village site, that they are looking at even expanding those more quickly and bringing those kind of centers online across the state. We were able to get funding to equip ODF&W to deal with the California sea lions that are all too prevalent at Willamette Falls. And I think that's going to be something that we'd really appreciate your ongoing partnership in, because these California sea lions are very wily, and they'll figure out one hazing mechanism. This is all non-lethal hazing they're doing. They'll figure out one hazing mechanism, and then the California sea lions figure out how to outsmart that, and then they have to adopt another one. And so as they're changing up those practices over the next couple seasons, I know there have been some noise complaints that you probably got, and I know ODF&W has been tuned into those. So definitely we'd love to be in dialogue with you about those to make sure those complaints are being addressed, while also keeping the California sea lions away from the fish and the fishermen. A couple of public safety issues that I think are relevant. One, the bill that passed related to ending the spiritual defense, the spiritual health defense that unfortunately has put Oregon City in the news far too often. I think this was really a very thoughtful approach, and we ended up with really broad support. Even the Christian Scientists came out in support of it, because I think it is a very narrowly targeted, thoughtful approach, but that will stop that from being used as an excuse for abusing or neglecting kids. And then redistricting, obviously, is going to... Clackamas County districts probably did change more than any other districts in the state. I actually have a map if you want to see the local district change. Fundamentally, the district I now represent, District 40, shifts south and will now take in all of Oregon City and actually go all the way down to the Oregon City School District line to the south of the city. Basically, all the districts moved out from Portland, and so that pushed. I was kind of the third layer out of push. So that's great from my perspective. Happy to have the entire city of Oregon City and the school district. But pretty dramatic changes. About 60% of my district will change, which again they draw the lines to try and keep communities of interest together and not worry about where the legislators end up, which is the way it should be. Probably the only other thing I'd mention actually two things on the budget side. One, anytime we were making the kind of dramatic budget cuts that we made this session, shared revenues to local governments are always something that pops up immediately on the table, because it looks like it's an easy cut to a lot of people. I'm happy to report that we didn't make any changes, any cuts at all to shared revenue to cities or counties, despite a lot of pressure to do so. That's the good news. The bad news side on the budget is that we were not able to get out any kind of constitutional rainy day fund kicker reform, which I think is just a real missed opportunity, especially coming on the heels of this recession, when it's been so abundantly clear that the best way to avoid major budget cuts, state and local, and frankly to avoid future tax increases during recessions, is to do kicker reform and sock away kicker checks in a constitutionally protected rainy day fund when times are good. But we're not successful in that, or Measure 5 and 50 reform, or initiative reform. They're just, when you have a 30-30 split House, there was just not the support to get those bills out of committee, even to send them out to voters for referral. So I'll stop there. We'll be happy to take any questions about those or other issues you may have.
Representative Hunt, I have a question. On the industrial lands bill, SB 766, do you have any crystal ball on how that would affect Oregon City?
You know, I don't. I think it's going to have a benefit statewide. Where those get cited is I think really an open question at this point. I think the good news of that is it's really wherever they do end up getting cited, and it doesn't say this on the sheet here, but one of the most significant things about that bill is it's going to expedite the state permits that are always required anytime you have those sites. So that's just a critical. I mean, so for local governments that are able to have those industrial land designations made there, the state permit requirements that will follow are going to be much shorter and much more expeditious. So I'm encouraged by that. But where exactly those are going to play out, I think, is still an open question.
I have a question about the HB 2861, equal pay for equal work. That seems like something that should have been out of the 70s or 80s or 60s or something. What's the difference there?
Well, and it also seems like something that should pass unanimously instead of be on the list of bills that were killed. I would agree, and I think, frankly, that that was a case. I mean, one of the dynamics of a 30-30 split is there are a lot of people who are empowered to kill bills. Because instead of a normal situation where you have one committee chair who can functionally decide to kill a bill, you now have two committee chairs, either of whom can decide to kill a bill. And that was a case where that bill was in the, let me make sure I've got the right one. Yeah, that bill was in the Business and Labor Committee, and one of the co-chairs of that committee locked down and wouldn't schedule for a work session.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Even though you may have been frustrated by some of those bills, I think we were all impressed with the bipartisan effort that went into your House. The co-chairs worked with each other to try to get things done. You got a lot of things done. I think if we can compare you to the national situation, you really stand up there on a pillar. And I want to congratulate you and your House for the tremendous effort that was put in during this period of recession. I think you did a great job considering the nature and the political climate.
And I think this is one of the things that we can be proud about the Oregon legislature, in part maybe because it's a citizen legislature, in part maybe just because of the tradition in Oregon. The legislature in Oregon has always been, and hopefully will always be, a much more bipartisan place. I mean, I look at the situation in D.C. the same way you do, and they just can't get anything done. When we've had times of Republican majorities and times of Democratic majorities and close majorities and supermajorities, and even for the first time tied, the level of bipartisanship in Salem really is very strong. And I think your point is well taken. The list, and as you can see, the list of accomplishments and highlights I have on this list is twice as long as the list of things that I thought also should have gotten done.
You've got long periods, for example, where you had a Democratic governor and a Republican legislature, and
Right.
some were able to get through those things. And I just want to compliment everybody that's been involved in that process.
And looking forward, I'm now chairing the Transportation and Economic Development Committee, co-chairing, I should say, the Transportation and Economic Development Committee, and so would really welcome thoughts you have either about things that would be particularly beneficial to Oregon City or things that would be good statewide policy changes, either on the economic development side or on the transportation side.
Great.
So,
Thank you.
thanks for the time. Thanks for your service.
Thank you.
Steve, Lloyd Purdy, a Main Street program is here.
Good evening, everyone. Mayor, thank you for inviting me to share some good news with everybody. I do enjoy getting to share good news. As the four of you may have noticed from an email I sent out maybe last week, we do have some good news to share. Once again, Oregon City and our downtown revitalization program was recognized at the national level. And I do like to keep you up to date with good news, but this is certainly merits, I guess, less than 3 minutes at the microphone here. I think there are about 700 and plus downtown programs throughout the country that are recognized by the National Trust. Of the 24 or so programs that are in the state of Oregon, there's only 4, and we're one of them, that got recognized by the national accreditation entity, which is the National Trust, for the good work we're doing. That reflects very well on Oregon City. None of the other programs have the private-public partnerships that we've created, and I guess I'd credit our success not just to those partnerships, but to some real results and some real deliverables. We do have a business recruitment campaign that, in fact, the city is a partner with us on, and that's gotten national and state attention. As you know, a number I like to, and I'm proud to share, by the end of this month, we'll have 36. We will have had 36 new business starts downtown since we started tracking those numbers. We just opened our latest new business downtown 2 Saturdays ago. It's Sandra Gilman from the hat shop. You can leave your hat on. Her neighbors will probably come online by the end of this month. In 2009 and 2010, I think we saw over $1 million each year in private investment and rehab to downtown properties. And this year, we're on track to do a very similar number to that. We balance that out with the support we got from ODOT and the state and the Fed and the city on a streetscape enhancement project. Of course, that's now in excess of $2.5 million to improve the pedestrian orientation and feel of downtown. So we do see nice successes happening. It's also nice to be recognized at the national level. So I think Oregon City deserves a pat on the back and a round of applause. That's about all I needed to share with you.
I want to thank your board and yourself for the tremendous work you have done. It's been great, and you could have gone over 3 minutes in this kind of presentation.
Yeah, right.
You know, I hold up. This is, I think, the prime example of economic success in the city of Oregon City.
Yes.
And thank you very much for your work. Are there any comments or questions?
I think you're doing a great job down there.
Thank you.
It takes a whole team. It takes a partnership.
Takes partnership.
It takes all of us. And I appreciate your support every time we've needed it.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lloyd.
Before we go to citizens' comments, I want to ask if there's anybody here representing the farmers market today. The reason I'm asking that, I believe that we have Farmers Market Week coming up, and I believe it's a national Farmers Market Week, and the Farmers Market next to the county buildings off of Beaver Creek Road, where Kane Road comes into it, is having a special program, and I would encourage people to go to that particular program on Saturday. I believe the big kickoff event is something like 10 o'clock or 10:30, but it's going to be a super thing, and I think the leaders of the farmers market had other personal commitments and they couldn't be here, but I want to make that announcement. And I also want to make another announcement. These are things that I don't want to hold until the mayor's report, because by that time everybody's turned off their television. Most of the people here have left. But we knew this was coming, but Benchmade Knives got LEED Gold certification in terms of their development up there. And it is actually the first Oregon LEED Gold certification in the for a manufacturing company. It may be our number one for-profit employer in the city. I'm not sure about that, but I think it has in excess of 100 employees in the Red Soils area, and I think this is a tremendous feather in their cap. Also, when people talk about urban renewal agencies and whether they should exist or not, I don't think they'd be here if it wasn't for the fact we had a Hilltop Urban Renewal Agency. And I wanted to get that special recognition. It's time out for citizens' comments. Any member here can come up and speak for 3 minutes. When you come up... Wait.
You have a proclamation?
Oh, I got a proclamation. I am sorry. Yes. In fact, I asked for this proclamation, did I not? Sorry about that. Yes, this is Geographic Awareness Week. Whereas the National Council of Geographic Education is holding its annual Geographic Conference in Portland, Oregon from August 1st to August 7th, 2011, and whereas geography teachers from throughout the state of Oregon are invited to participate in the national meeting, and whereas the study of geography is essential to understanding our relationship with our environment and the world around us, and whereas the state of Oregon is dedicated to ensuring the study of geography is properly emphasized at all levels of our educational system and communities, and whereas our city and state strive to have the nation's best educated workforce, and whereas we encourage all teachers to take advantage of the many resources available at the conference and in professional organization to become more knowledgeable about geography as we go forward in an ever-changing world. Now, therefore, I, Doug Neely, Mayor of Oregon City, do proclaim August 1 through August 7, 2011, to be Geography Awareness Week and encourage all citizens of Oregon City to join in this observance, and witness thereof. I have set my signature on this third day of August 2011, 2 days late for the beginning of the event, but I think it's a particularly worthy event, and that's why I requested to have a proclamation made. With that, is there anybody that's in geography want to make any comments? Anyway, with that, we'll go ahead with citizens' comments, and we'll have 3 minutes for comments. We have people that are listed here. If you have not yet signed a card to speak, you can get a card here from our city recorder. I'll call you in the order in which the signature cards have come in. Request that you spend no more than 3 minutes unless you make a request and we feel you can go on. And when you come up, just state your name and whether or not you live in the city of Oregon City. Do not give us any addresses. We'll start off with Damon Mabey and Rebecca, is it Enemark? Do I have that right? Yes, sir. Please come forward. And Damon, you're first on the list, so I'll have you speak first.
She's doing veteran stuff. She wins.
Oh, she wins. All right.
As a vet.
As a vet. Okay.
Definitely going to.
Can I pass these?
Absolutely.
As you said, my name is Rebecca Enemark. Thank you so much, Mayor, for having us here. I'm here with Mrs. Marilyn Boyle. She's also a volunteer with Operation Homefront. Operation Homefront of Oregon is an organization that assists our deployed soldiers and their families and our wounded warriors. We are proud to announce the Freedom Walk of 2011, which this year marks the 10-year anniversary since 9/11. Our goal of the Freedom Walk is to really help remember the victims that were lost in 9/11, not only the victims who were in the towers, the Pentagon, and the Pennsylvania field, but the police officers that were lost, the firefighters who were lost, and also the soldiers who have been lost on the war on terror. In front of you is a letter from our event coordinator, Shannon Bussell. This letter states, "Dear community members, Operation Homefront is proud to announce the 2011 Freedom Walk. This year's walk will be held nationwide on Sunday, September 11th, 2011, the 10-year anniversary of the unforgettable events of 9/11. Throughout the country, citizens will gather to walk together as a nation, uniting our communities behind a commitment to never forget the lives we lost in the attacks on our country on September 11th, 2001. Operation Homefront Oregon is hosting the Oregon Freedom Walk at Clackamas Community College in Oregon City, Oregon, on Sunday, September 11th, 2011. This event is a 5K walk. The event will run from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m., and registration is free. We are hoping to make our Oregon Freedom Walk the biggest that Operation has seen to date. We will be soliciting sponsor donations and selling T-shirts on site for $20 to benefit the needs of our deployed and newly returned soldiers. Our organization is a nonprofit 501c3 organization which supports our military families with emergency financial assistance as well as food assistance while their loved ones are deployed or just coming home and reintegrating. Any help that you can provide would be greatly appreciated. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me at 541-401-8500. Thank you in advance for your time and consideration to Mrs. Shannon Bussell, who is our event coordinator. Operation Homefront is a dear an organization to me. I am going through my second deployment, and I volunteer with Operation Homefront and have since my husband was in Iraq. He's currently stationed in Afghanistan, and the Freedom Walk touches my heart. We lost several thousand people that day, and we lost 345 firefighters, and police officers. Currently, we have the Welch's Fire Department on board, Advocare on board, Tri-West on board. We're working on KUPL. We're working on the police department. Clackamas Community College has donated their field to us, and we are asking for help to help publicize our event because we would really like to educate the community and help remember what happened that dreadful day and why we're still fighting this war on terror. Any questions?
Great.
Thank you. And I think it's important for the citizens of Oregon City and West Lynn in particular, because we, for the past 9 years, have memorialized that particular date on the Arch Bridge, where we have unfurled a flag. The Arch Bridge is closed, and there was no way that we checked into it, and there was really no way that we could do that. And I would say, if you need assistance from the city, please talk through our city manager as to what we can do. And I would suggest West Lynn as well. We have committed some resources in the past to those particular events we've had. And I'm so pleased that we're going to have this recognition in Oregon City. I could if you wanted to come forward and say something too, you're welcome to do so. I know that Mr. Mabee will be happy to relinquish his seat.
Well, I think my name is Marilyn Boyle, and I thank you for allowing us to make our presentation today. I think the really important thing is, we have really tried to put this together in a very short period of time, but the response has been tremendous. We contacted numerous fire departments within the area, and their response was huge. As you know, on 9/11, they came from all over the nation, and they're doing it in the Portland Metro Tri-County area now. All we had to do was basically get the word out, and the doors opened. And we'll be contacting the police departments and that also, because it was a terrible tragedy, and it should never, ever be forgotten. And our soldiers are over there fighting for us today. And only 1% of the nation, as far as the population, is affected by this. So a lot of us don't have military in our own personal families. And we all need to be aware that they're fighting for us over there. We're fortunate to have the freedom that we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just make the request, ask the question perhaps of our city recorder whether we can get this on the front page of our website as a temporary fix, and perhaps suggest West Lynn might do the same.
Yes, and we may even try to do more as far as having a booth at the walk and some other things. So
very nice.
I'll talk to you about that later and encourage West Lynn to join us in that.
Very good.
And did you ladies talk with the chamber on both sides too, West Lynn and Oregon City?
We have not yet, no.
That might be a good option for you, because they do have postings that they could do and put it in their e-news blast. And
Perfect. Thank you very much
You're
for helping
very
us
welcome.
with this. We greatly appreciate it, and thank you for your time.
Sure, thank
Oregon
you.
City has opened their hearts.
Yes.
It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
With that, thank you, former Commissioner Mabee, for relinquishing your seat.
Well, glad to do it. And I guess just a second before my time starts, I'd like to wrap that up with the National Geography thing you had. As a teacher and a geography teacher, I've had in the last few years several students say, "Why are we paying attention and studying the Middle East? What's that going to mean to me?" And after I stop laughing and say, "Look, we've been fighting there with armed forces since before you were born. What makes you not think that when you graduate you're not going to put on a uniform? Especially since I know your GPA." It usually works for about a day, and then they forget, and off they go, and then they'll end up in the program that we heard about earlier. Anyway, I'm glad to see that we're continuing on. I'm glad to see that there's something going on, since we can't do the bridge ceremony. So,
yeah, I'm going to make a comment after that, because I know you were being somewhat facetious. Of course, many people that enlist in the armed forces are doing so because that's a commitment they do make. In the time when I was eligible, there was a draft, and we now have a all-volunteer army. And one of the reasons you say only 1% of the people are affected. And I'm glad we have an all-volunteer army, but
Air Force.
as a result, a lot of us don't feel the pain that people felt earlier, and so we have some excellent people that do enlist in the force, and doesn't have anything to do with their GPA. And I know we were being facetious, but I didn't want to make that particular comment.
no, and I completely agree. It really was more of a statement of their ability to get some other job, since there doesn't appear to be a lot of those around right now. So, anyway, back to the business I actually signed up for. and I guess it's a good segue since I just mentioned jobs. Well, sitting at home a week or so ago in the doldrums of unemployment, I was watching Perry Mason, and lo and behold, Perry Mason was defending a mill owner from Oregon City from a murder charge. And needless to say, of course, he wasn't guilty. Oregonians don't do things like that.
And Perry Mason would have defended her if she was.
But in that case, it turned out to be the shyster LA person. But anyway, what that got me thinking was how many other things have happened in Oregon City, media-wise, that we don't know about. I called my dad, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I knew about that." But what else? And so I looked on the city's website. There's no indication of that. The first movie filmed in Oregon City was in 1919. In the last 10 years, there's been several of them. Some of them kind of low budget, but Twilight, Bandits with Bruce Willis and Billy Bob Thornton, who's an Academy Award winner.
Not for that movie, though.
No, but still. And Leverage is filmed here as a TV show with Timothy Hutton, again, another Academy Award winner. So what I would request is that the city have the city recorder or the library. I think it should be an official thing that the city get copies of all the media events, not news, but TV and movies that involve Oregon City, even peripherally, and preserve them. Put them officially in our archives, and then the economic director do things like post that information on our website, so that if, for instance, a production company is looking for some place to shoot, and they can go, "Oh, look, Oregon City does lots of stuff. They're friendly." It would be a beneficial thing, and then possibly have copies of the more recent ones. We probably can't find the 1919 one, but have the library actually have those available in like a special section. Along with that, put up movie posters both in our lobby, in the library, just to make people aware of the fact that Oregon City is out there and doing things. And it just seems a shame that it took a random event for me to find out that Oregon City would appear on TV, and so we should preserve that so that that doesn't get lost.
Once I gave a workshop, actually it was in Africa, and there were several people from different countries attending it, and nobody knew what Oregon City was except one person who realized that's where Tonya Harding was tried. I think we could get some of the positive media coverage would be good.
Well, I didn't say news. I said
So,
but it just seems like that's a terrible thing for us to lose, especially because, like the 1919 movie, if it's filmed in Oregon City, it would have scenes of Oregon City in that era. You end up with a timeline to show what's happening in the city and what's going on. So.
There's a Jimmy Stewart Western where I saw him crossing with other cowboys Mount Hood.
Yeah.
And then later
How the West was won.
Then later in the movie, there's the scene of downtown 19th century Oregon City and all the bar fights and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. How the West was won had some scenes. I mean, there's lots of little things where it's like the big one that I just saw was the Sasquatch Gang or something like that, where the Carnegie Center was a jail, even though it still had Carnegie Center on the door. But it's scenes of the city at various incarnations, and I think it's an important historical record.
Well, I saw it on first release, actually. That's how far back I go. I don't think that was the title.
The 1991?
It was the something Sasquatch.
Oh no, I'm talking about the Jimmy Stewart.
Oh yeah.
And I remember it as a kid because there was a jet vapor trail up in the sky.
No, it was a strange, curious cumulus formation, I'm sure.
I want to just comment that Damon Mabey, in fact, is a veteran of the first Gulf War.
Yeah, the kids I'm teaching now weren't even born then, which is disturbing. I understand now what Vietnam vets went through with me.
Yes. John Surface and James Hamilton, please come forward. Bend in the River.
Yeah.
That's the name of the movie.
Hello.
Yes.
I'd like to get a code changed.
Okay.
I'm a long-haul truck, I'm sorry.
Yes, your name, please, from the city.
My name's John Surface. I live in Oregon City. I happen to be a long-haul truck driver. And I bring my truck home in the afternoon, not in the afternoons, but about maybe once a month. And I park my truck at my house. Well, I was informed that it is a violation to park my truck there because it's classified a commercial vehicle. But my truck, when I'm bobtail, which is without trailer, is classified personal conveyance. It would be the same as your motorhome, taking your motorhome home. But since it's the code, I'm not going to be allowed to be able to take my truck home once a month. I'm only home maybe like 6 days a month.
So that designation of personal conveyance is a state designation?
Yeah, it means that I no longer, at that point, as the police officer may or may not know, at that point I no longer have to be on my logs, on my drive line or on my on work lines. I have to be on I can be on the off-duty lines and state where I am at. I do not. It's considered an off-duty function. I'm an owner-operator. But it's kind of, times are tight, money's hard to come up with, and I think that might be when the code was written, it probably was a good idea, but technology is advanced to a certain point where it might not be as advantageous to make a blank assessment. People are allowed, if they have a motor home and they have RV parking at their residence, they're allowed to go and take their motor home. And my tractor is no different than a motor home when it's without a trailer.
I'd ask the city manager to perhaps explore that designation of the vehicle.
Mayor, this is an odd way to propose legislation, but the city of Oregon City has a code much like any other city in Oregon that prevents large commercial vehicles like that, regardless of the state statutory designation, from being in residential areas. And one person's personal vehicle is somebody else's odor, noise, and other complaint that would be generated. So we would be, I think, one of the few cities that would, I don't know of another city in Oregon that would allow that, or that has allowed that, but, and as far as the designation with motorhomes, again, without the code here right in front of us, I think you'll find that there's limits on that too. Depending on the size of the motorhome and what it's used for, some cities have had enforcement issues with motorhomes and people actually living out of them for extended periods of time in residential neighborhoods where they're trying to sell their home, and yet they've got this vehicle that's essentially a home that's not paying taxes but is affecting property values in the neighborhood. So there's just lots of ramifications to changing your code in that way. Mm-hmm. If there is an interest among commissioners in us doing that, certainly we would review it, bring it back to you, and see if you want to go there.
Many of our codes are generated by citizen complaints, in fact, in terms of those kinds of things. I mean, historically, the impact it's had in the neighborhoods.
Sure, because, I think if everybody on that street is a over-the-road driver and has a similar feeling as this gentleman, then you probably have no problem. But if you have a majority of people on there who don't share that view, then you've got other issues to deal with. So it is a challenge, but it's one that most cities deal with the same way that we do.
If you have a diesel pusher, and that's what a lot of the big motorhomes are, 30 foot. My truck's shorter than a diesel pusher. It's the same motor, it's an automatic transmission. It is longer than my truck, and they would be the same odor, same everything. The semis, the companies that are responsible for them, have made advancements so that you don't have to run the truck if it's too cold. If it's too hot, it's a semi. It's not big enough to stay during the day. But it's if anyone here had an RV, like a big diesel pusher, and you had RV parking at your house, is it fair to classify that vehicle in that manner? It can't. It's the same as my truck. It's a commercial vehicle at that point because it has air brakes and a large enough motor, and you have to have a special license to drive it. And I know a lot of people, especially a lot of older people, enjoy their motorhomes. They enjoy going out and doing their recreational activities.
I think you're coming before us. I don't know whether this is going to result in a code change. I doubt it, but is there somebody that you could direct him to have a discussion with?
Well, there's a possibility if the commission wants to refer it to the Transportation Advisory Committee, I think that would be your first option. If there's enough interest on the commission to do that, I wouldn't refer them there just, without some consideration. You might want to think about this for a while or talk to our code enforcement division before you consider even whether you want to refer it. Because I do see some real challenges ahead for you if you go that route.
Okay.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'll have the fact that this discussion has occurred as part of the public record, and I'll request that part of the public record be available to the Transportation Advisory Committee. Thank you.
Very good questions. Might want to hear the rest of this. By the way, I thank you, Mr. Neely, for your call on Friday. It seems that David Fraser was unavailable to making a call back to me, as you had suggested that he would do on Monday.
I requested that you get a hold of him. I did inform him on Monday that you would be getting a hold of him.
My understanding was that
Mr.
you were
Mayor,
going to have him call me.
I haven't heard
I
from
waited
Mr.
throughout the day for that.
Till tonight.
Yeah, my request was for you to contact him. I informed him on Monday when he did get back that to expect a call from you.
Anyway, thank you for your concern. As you know, we're moving forward on our for an elected municipal court judge on the ballot, and we're moving along on that. So, dear City Council members, elected servants to the people, bound by the constitutional oath of office to perform in accordance, let alone your convictions of morality. As you all know, I was physically attacked by Bud's Towing, your code enforcement, and told to back off of my personal property or I will kill you. It doesn't seem to affect anybody here whatsoever, and I've been vilified in the newspaper and everywhere else. I don't care about that. Matter of fact, you can do what you want with my van, but it was about $8,000 worth of van, and you got it down at Bud's Towing for $1,400. Why don't you raise the price a little bit and give me my money back? We, the common people, believe that reform is required in Oregon City. My name is James Lee Hamilton. I'm a free-loving American and a sovereign. I represent the common people of Oregon City, the Committee of Oregonians, the Committee of the Proper Enforcement of Motor Vehicle Laws. We, the people, are requesting a complete reform of Oregon City code enforcement departments at all, that's including the police department. Please provide for our inspection the required public records which describes the grounds and the particulars of law this city enforces, presented in public forum for a redress of grievances by the people in protest of the city's oppressive and discriminatory and threatening code enforcement policies. The committee already has video testimonies of court enforcement victims compiled by the team. Reform must be done for the good of the people. That means a total reform back to the basics and back to financial accountability as it should be for the good of the people. This city's out of control. This is not an unreasonable request due to the escalation of actions against the people being reported. We know you members of the City Council will uphold your oath of office in this decision. Therefore, we, the people in the committees mentioned, move the City Council for a quick resolution of this request, and we would like a decision or comment this evening. We, the people, must secure the benefits of freedom for ourselves and our posterity for the future of Oregon City and peace upon the city. This is a must-do. Article 4 and Section 4 says you have no regulating powers over the people. For your information, the Oregon Constitution is a governing document of the state of Oregon, effective upon statehood on February 14th of 1859. The rights of the people are contained within, and at the 6th grade reading level, anybody can understand it. For your information, the Oregon Revised Statutes is a codified body of statutory law governing the state of Oregon as enacted by the Oregon Legislative Assembly and occasionally by citizen initiative. The statutes are subordinate to the Oregon Constitution. If the statutes are subordinate to the statutes, and the term statutes technically means the law of the Jew, I'm a Sephardic Jew. I therefore submit, Mr. Neely and council members, that your city regulations are in violation of the statutes in which every member of this council took an oath of understanding and preparation for this great service. Yet I have an extra minute.
I think we've heard most of this before the commission, and so I'm not going to grant it. But I do make a request of you In terms of the specific impoundment of the vehicle, I do ask you to talk to our city manager. I mentioned that you would be doing so on Monday when he got back from his
In
vacation.
my case, like this gentleman, he is a commercial driver. Driver is a commercial term in the state of Oregon.
The other thing I want to mention is an employee of Bud's Towing, to the best of my knowledge, is not a code enforcement officer.
He's a contract employee of the city. That's what they call him. Okay?
Yeah.
And nobody's investigated
Okay.
him, and I've been looking into some of the statutes on that for people who are contract employees or having some emotional mental problems when they're working with other citizens.
Okay.
So I think perhaps somebody in your code enforcement should follow up, wouldn't you
Thank
think? What's he going to do with the next person? Maybe he'll...
I'm going to
go a
call
little
forward
further.
William Gifford now.
Thank you.
Oh, and Charles Stewart, excuse me. Come forward, and Charles Stewart will speak first.
Hello.
Hello.
I am here basically at the request of Mr. Hamilton. I'm from Sandy. I'm a Clackamas County resident. I consider myself a constitutional law scholar, and my friend Mr. Hamilton, we've conversed on the phone, and obviously I think to kind of clear the air a little bit here, my humble attempt at it, Mr. Hamilton's obviously a bit frustrated with what's going on here. But I think the problem stems from the fact that the municipal form of government under which you and all cities are operating, basically pretty much, is basically an unconstitutional form of government, as well as the municipal court is an unconstitutional form of court adjudicating process. It's basically a military tribunal. And that can be illustrated by the fact that we have a constitutional guarantee for due process of law to be available to the people. Due process of law, that's a constitutional guarantee. That should be something that y'all can click on in your mind. And the municipal court does not follow constitutional due process of law. It follows a military style of summary judgment process, and that inherently abuses the rights of the people. And so you get things like Mr. Hamilton being emotionally frustrated because his constitutionally guaranteed rights are not being respected by your municipal form of jurisdiction and court adjudication enforcement. And so Mr. Hamilton's request that the municipal judge be elected, that would be a big step in the right direction. And I would even suggest the judicial power is supposed to be decentralized down amongst the communities, and there should be a court of law at the lower, smaller level here. If y'all could at least provide Mr. Hamilton with a court of law that has jury trials that follow due process of law, and we shouldn't have to go to the county to do that. The more smaller local precincts should be allowed to do that. And I dare say that the grabbing Mr. Hamilton's van in the manner which it was done was not in harmony with fundamental principles of due process of law. I plan on being in consultation with Mr. Hamilton about all of this. We've got emails that we can talk about it in the background. I believe that things like this can be settled amongst honorable people without the necessity of inflammatory.
And I
Okay.
hope that I hope that Mr. Hamilton does make the appointment with our city manager. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Pat, William Gifford.
Mr. Mayor, City Commissioners, my name is William Gifford. I live in Oregon City, and I love this unconstitutional government of ours. And this city is my favorite city. One part of this city that is evidence is what happened last night, which I just thought was outstanding, the National Night Out. what a great outpouring of citizens and neighbors all getting together to learn about each other. I appreciate the police force being there and the fire district, and it was a good turnout. It was a very good. A lot of people worked very hard for that. It was a pleasure to see you there, Mr. Mayor. The CIC, the Citizen Involvement Council, of which I'm secretary, also had a booth there. We made a lot of very good contacts with a lot of neighbors, and it was good for us to be there. A lot of people want to know more about what neighborhoods they're in and what they can do to participate in their neighborhoods. The CIC not only had a booth there, but on the fourth Saturdays of every month, we also have booths at the Farmers Market, which is another great event that the city hosts, and the CIC gets a lot of input from the city's market as well. And then last Saturday, we had our first city celebration, I'm sure you're all aware of. It was another delightful outpouring. This unconstitutional city is just great. I love it. And Mr. Mayor, thank you very much for your contribution at the first city celebration. Very honorable of you to get up there and get dunked so frequently.
And it was so fun to dunk you, Doug.
Oh, everyone loved that, I'm sure. Yeah, absolutely. And that was down at Liberty Plaza. And I was surprised when I was down at Liberty Plaza watching the mayor get dunked that a citizen came up to me and told me that this Friday at 6:30 there's supposed to be a recall rally at Liberty Plaza, which was a surprise to me. So he said 6:30 Friday night there's supposed to be a rally at Liberty Plaza. Anyway, I appreciate this unconstitutional city, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I was going to probably talk to attorney whether my constitutional rights were abused by being dunked so many times.
Well, we're pretty sure they were, and probably rightly so.
Thank you. With that, we're going to go
I'm
into...
sure you made a lot of money for your cause, too.
It was a fundraiser for the Greater Oregon City Watershed Council.
And people really enjoyed dunking him.
And, yes, many people did. What I'd like to do, I'm going to pull back up on the agenda here, but we're going into I believe it's a public hearing.
Mm-hmm.
And this has to do, as soon as I come to my agenda, this is the consideration of a 6.5 acre annexation petition under the Parkways Concept Plan. And we'll be getting this report, I presume, from Mr. Cockle?
Pete.
Or Pete, excuse me.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor Neely and City Commissioners. It's a pleasure to be before you this evening. I'm going to be presenting to you a 6.5 acre annexation in the northeastern portion of the city. This is an area that has been part of the Park Place Concept Plan. It has a comprehensive plan designation of medium density residential, and if you're looking at our comprehensive plan, that's a residential designation that allows for various types of housing, both attached and detached, as well as in this case, the applicant is not proposing a zoning request with the application. They're merely proposing annexation at this time. Any zoning request would have to come at a later time, so I want to make that very clear, and I'll explain why that is as I go through my report. The first, yes.
Peter, I'm having somebody asking who you are. I know, but it's somebody. I think the audience doesn't. And I think Tony was identified here. So if you could.
Sure. I'm sorry. I'm Pete Walter. I'm the associate planner in the planning department.
Thank you.
There's two minor errors in the Planning Commission staff report, which is in your exhibits, Exhibit 1, I believe. I just want to make reference to those. First is page 7, paragraph 3. Fourth and sixth sentences, there are some references to the existing county zoning of RRF5. Those references should be deleted. The county zoning of this parcel at the moment is FU10. The second error is at the top of page 10 of the Planning Commission staff report, which references a Oregon City Municipal Code section as 17.04.080. That should be 14.04.080, which is our annexation code. As I said, this is a 6.5 acre parcel. It is joining the Wasco Acres, Trailview, and another subdivision on the north and east side. There are 3 local street stubs into the site. The Holcomb Boulevard to the north is a minor arterial road. The other 3 street stubs into the site are local roads. The site has a slope of about 10% to the southwest. There are no identified natural hazards, wetlands, or water resources on the site. If you visited the site, you'll notice that there's scattered trees and brush on the site right now. I'd like to give you a little bit of background on the Park Place concept plan. The arrow in the upper right-hand corner shows the area superimposed on the final concept plan that was adopted by the city in March 2008. The concept plan envisions about 480 acres of land. Of that 480 acres, approximately 200 acres of the land was determined to be actually flat and developable. The area that is proposed for annexation is in the extreme northeast area of what is called the North Village. So there's where Lifesey Road is now. Lifesey Road is shown on our comprehensive plan. I'll go back as the mixed-use corridor comprehensive plan designation. And that would be the area where there would be some higher density mixed use developing. This area is shown on the concept plan as medium and low density residential. The total number of units envisioned for the North Village is around 900 of varying densities. So it could be at build-out, whenever build-out is, it would envision approximately 700 to 800 units of housing in the North Village area and a equivalent proportion in the South Village area. The concept plan looked at connecting Redland Road to Holcomb Boulevard via an extension of Holly Lane, which you can see on the concept plan here, which I think I won't be able to show it, but you can see the center of the site, the Holly Lane intersection with Redland Road. This annexation would not be constructing any portion of that connector road. It would only be part of an annexation proposal. In the future, any subdivision in this area would be local road connections. Yes? Oh, thank you. Very nice. So this is the Holly Lane connection, which I'm showing here. Here's a close-up of the area. The quarter-mile radius reference is shown there to show the proximity of a future regional park in the area, which was one of the planning considerations when the Park Place concept plan was adopted. As you can see, to the north of the site, Cattle Drive is where the city limit is stubbed in, and then we've got the 2 other local roads here. Oh, okay.
Identify something.
Can't use the cursor on the PowerPoint. It's a separate thing. Yeah, yeah. When we review annexation proposals, there are criteria in the code that I'll go through. The first of the code criteria in Chapter 14 is adequacy of access to the site. As I mentioned, Holcomb Boulevard is minor arterial, and Journey, Shartner, and Cattle Drive are local streets. They also have sewer, stormwater, and water stubs in those local streets that can be connected through the site. The second criteria that must be shown to be in consideration is conformity of the proposal with the city's comprehensive plan. That requires consideration of the Park Place concept plan, as well as the Goal 14, or urbanization, and Goal 11, provision of public services, parts of the existing comprehensive plan. When the Park Place plan was adopted, it was adopted as an update to the city comprehensive plan. The third consideration is whether the proposal has adequate and available public facilities and services to service potential development on the site. The services that the city would be providing upon development are sanitary sewer, water. Currently, the site is vacant and is served by well water and CRW water lines. I just need to point out that there is a agreement with Clackamas River Water for portions of the Park Place concept plan. However, this site is not part of that agreement, so it could be immediately connected to city water upon annexation, upon development of the site. Stormwater must be designed according to the Park Place concept plan guidelines, which talked about a provision of both regional and on-site stormwater to try to mimic natural stormwater management in the Park Place area. City Public Works Department is in the process of developing low-impact development standards, as well as an update to our stormwater design standards. And so those would be applied to any subdivision or development proposal. Fire protection, site is currently within Clackamas Fire District Number 1, and one of our recommendations is not that we not withdraw this property from that district. So there's no special consideration needs to be made for fire protection for this existing already. With respect to law enforcement, the police department currently serves the area with a ratio of 1.33 officers per 1,000. The response times that I note in my staff report, the police department has a goal of a 4-minute emergency response time. They have a 7 to 9 minute actual response time and a 20-minute non-emergency response time. And so the average is about 9 minutes. So the annexation would have some impact on police services. Currently, the area is served by Clackamas County Sheriff's Department's Enhanced Law Enforcement District. And upon annexation, it would be withdrawn from that district and served by the police department. And in recognition of this shortcoming in police services, what has traditionally been proposed by annexation applicants is a building permit. At the time of building permit, they would contribute a fee of $3,500 per housing unit to accommodate the additional service needs of that annexation.
Pete, what is that specific number based on?
It is based on a unit cost per housing unit. How it was calculated, I believe, is based on whether it's a low or a high service need for single family. Single family requires a higher service than a commercial development or a multifamily development. And I'd be happy to go into more detail on that as we move forward.
Excuse me, is that based on current zoning or future zoning? Will it be determined as of future zoning?
Well, it's determined on future development of building permits, yes. We've attached in Exhibit 7 the Schedule A police funding fees, which is attached to the proposed draft annexation agreement. The next service, and this is very important in terms of the Park Place concept plan, is the provision of parks, open space, and recreation. The Park Place concept plan identified conceptual parks areas, trail areas, and other areas nearby. The way the city accommodates park and open space services also through our system development charges. When a building permit is paid, one of the system development charges is the park's system development charge. Currently, our 2011 park SDC for single-family residents is $3,643, and those fees are used to fund park capital infrastructure improvements that are serving a particular area. And the Parks Department has got their own master planning process for regional and neighborhood parks that can be most efficiently serving areas of new development. We also have the transportation system adequacy, which is a significant part of the analysis of any development in this area. As part of the Park Place concept plan adoption, we made findings for whether development of the area would be compliant with the transportation planning rule of the state. And we deferred compliance with the transportation planning rule until the time of zoning. Transportation planning rule analysis is fairly detailed. It's looking at a 20-year planning horizon and how future development and any subsequent development adjacent to that development will impact a state facility, in this case Highway 213 and I-205 and the intersections that feed into those major interchanges. When the concept plan was adopted, we also adopted updates to our capital improvement plan and incorporated those numbers in Chapter 5 of the Park Place concept plan into our transportation system charge new SDC, which as of January 1st of this year has gone up to $7,000, and there's that's the exact amount is I don't have the exact number, but it's $7,028 with a $202 bike and pedestrian proportion per single family residence. The city may rely on provision of SDCs as a showing of compliance with the transportation planning rule, but the applicant has to do that analysis at the time of subdivision and zoning in order to show compliance. The TPR analysis has not been done, and as with previous annexation proposals for this area, we've recommended to the applicant has agreed to separate annexation and zoning, thus separating the need to do a detailed transportation planning rule analysis until a subdivision is proposed and a rezoning is proposed. Any rezoning proposal will need to do a scoping of the TPR, and we'll go through that and come before you to show whether those facilities are impacted. If at the time of zoning it is shown that there's a significant effect on a state facility, the applicant will need to propose mitigation for that. And the mitigation can take the various forms. It could be reliance on the system development charges, reliance on any existing improvements in place at that time. And I should note that the Jug Handle project is a significant transportation improvement that is going forward as this application is being reviewed. So that would also factor into any future analysis that is required to be done. The fourth factor is compliance with the applicable Oregon revised statutes. Oregon ORS 222, which is primarily a contiguity with existing city limits requirement. It also Metro Code 309, which is a boundary change criteria, which makes similar references to the need for adequacy of public services. I've made findings in the staff report with respect to that, and also recognition of any existing service agreements and planning agreements for the annexation area. The city has had a long-standing growth management agreement with Clackamas County for all the areas within the urban growth boundary, and that provides for adequate notice to the county and collaboration with the county on comparative zoning. So when the city adopts a comprehensive plan designation, the county is also supposed to adopt a comprehensive plan designation within that urban growth plan. And so we've provided appropriate notice to the county in this regard. They didn't have any comments on the proposal other than to talk about the existing tax lot situation on the property, because you have 6.5 acres, which is part of a larger legal lot of record comprising several tax lots. And prior to any development, the 6.5 acres will need to be partitioned out separately to change the legal lot of record. But that does not affect compliance with Metro Code 309. Fifth factor is whether there are any natural hazards identified by the city, such as wetlands, floodplains, and steep slopes. As I mentioned, there are none. What is considered a steep slope is a slope over 25%. And we have done the wetland and floodplain overlay, necessary overlay mapping when we did the Park Place concept plan. There are certainly places within Park Place concept plan adjacent to this parcel that would need to be looked at for compliance with the city's natural resource overlay district requirements. This is not affected by that, however. Similarly, we have to take into account whether there be any significant adverse effect on specially designated open space, scenic, historic, or natural resources areas by urbanization of the subject property at the time of annexation. We've looked at this in some detail. We would look at it even closer at the time of zoning and subdivision. As I mentioned, there are no identified areas like this. And finally, we have to make a finding of lack of any significant adverse effects on the economic, social, and physical environment of the community by the overall impact of the annexation. I've briefly outlined some of the shortcomings with serving the area with respect to law enforcement, which can be accommodated through the applicant's proposal for a police service fee. The annexation itself will not create any impact on the city other than a small increase in the tax base until such time as actual buildings are proposed or subdivision of development is proposed. Staff is satisfied that there would be no significant adverse effects due to the annexation. With respect to the City Commission's role in findings for this annexation, the code states that the City Commission shall only set for an election annexations consistent with a positive balance of these 7 factors. The applicant has been working towards a goal of getting on the ballot for the November 8th, and the timing of that ballot and the ballot title is before you in your exhibits. The Planning Commission has reviewed the application and recommended approval of it, and so does staff. The only other exhibits which the applicant will probably want to present to you in person are some additional exhibits with respect to the last exhibit in the packet with some economic impacts of home builder. The Home Builders Association has provided the economic impact of new home construction, and there's a pretty lengthy packet in there for you in that regard. And staff's recommendation is to recommend approval of the proposed annexation and to set the election for November 8th, 2011. If you have any questions about the annexation, I'll do my best to answer them.
Is there anything that you wish to state prior to us?
Yes.
Having questions of the Commission and also opening the public hearing.
Okay. This is, it's not clear the nature of this hearing, whether it's legislative or quasi-judicial. I'm going to advise you to use the more restrictive of the two, and so I will ask you the usual questions that attend a quasi-judicial proceeding. Has any member of the Commission had any pre-hearing or ex-parte contact on the matter at issue tonight?
I understand that site visits are considered ex parte.
Yes.
I visited the site this evening.
Okay. Anybody else?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
I'm familiar with the site, but not since this is before us.
Okay. And then, is there any bias, interest, pecuniary or otherwise, that would prevent members of the City Commission from hearing and deciding this proceeding fairly? This is a de novo hearing. In other words, you can take new evidence and you can consider whatever anybody says. This is a proceeding in which the Commission has a great deal of discretion. It's a balance of factors. You are not compelled to send anything to the voters, but you are obliged to articulate the reasons for whatever action you take. The balance is up to you, and I think Pete and I will help you looking at the facts and trying to set out the correct test, but this is your decision.
So, any questions by the commissioners at this time before I open the public hearing? That will open the public hearing, and I've got just a moment here, and I'll find my list, get off this screen. And I have Damon Mabey and Paul Edgar on the list to speak. Please come forward. Again, even those who have spoken before, you still have to identify who you are and whether you live in Oregon City or not.
Which I failed to do last time. I apologize.
Well, I didn't catch you. Neither the city recorder.
So, for the record, my name is Damon Mabey. I'm a resident of Oregon City. My comments aren't actually about the particular merits of this annexation. They have to do with what is in the annexation request and what isn't in the annexation request. I'm already on record as a planning commissioner for that aspect. My comments concern, well, first, what's missing is I think that the city needs to have a specific policy that any annexation includes signing over water rights to the city, to the municipality. We fight over river water on a regular basis. There is a completely different standard for groundwater, and we need to take control of that while we can before the supposed 1 million people move into the region, because right now CRW is draining the aquifer up around South End Road because they have access to it. We don't. And we need to get control of that. One of the best things we can do is in the winter, we can fill it with high water from the river, and then in the low water years, we can tap it. So I think it should be a specific policy of the city to do everything they can to gain control of water rights. There's really good legislation out there. It's been fought for hundreds of years, and we should get control of it and make it a municipal need. It's for the common weal, and that's our job, or your job at this point. For what is in there, I have a real objection to the police fee. I had objections when I sat on the council, but at the time that particular annexation was over 160 acres, there was 900 houses, we had 5 less police officers in the city, and so I just kind of went with the flow because there was an economic need for it. Since then, I've had plenty of time to think about it, and I just think it's wrong, especially absent a formal policy of the city on how police funds are going to be, how we're going to accrue these funds. First off, this happens to be tied to an annexation. What happens to the next annexation that comes through and the city has to say it doesn't meet the police need because there's no compensation in there? Then the person says, well, I didn't pay the bribe to the city, so therefore I'm not getting my annexation. Now I understand that the developer actually volunteered all this. That is what it is. But I think that it's bad form for there not to be a specific policy in place. What if somebody wants to develop the Walmart property, which is already inside the city, and they want to put 75 houses down on that property, which will fit? They don't have to pay a fee. What's different? Everybody talks about developers have to pay their fair share. One of them sitting next to me, but they also should have to pay the same share. If I want to split my property up and put 6 houses on my 2/3 of an acre, that's a police impact, but I don't have to pay that fee. So just because they're annexing, there shouldn't be this fee, especially absent a specific policy. And if we do need the money, then we need to put it down for people whenever they divide their property, whenever they change the usage of their property, whether it goes from commercial to residential, large, R10 to R3.5. It's either a necessity, there should be a policy, or it's not necessary and it's extortion. We shouldn't do it. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to let Paul Edgar go next. I did not follow our order. The applicant is supposed to be able to speak to us prior to the public input. You go ahead and proceed, and then I'll have the applicant come forward.
Thank you. My name is Paul Edgar, Oregon City. I've looked at a lot of, as a neighborhood land use chairman, I've looked at a lot of applications and building permits and everything over a lot of years. I've had I supported the increase of to the current level, the SDC fees that we put together. I still believe that they're inadequate in fully addressing the cost to the city and to all utilities, everything that we could face. This is an incremental type annexation without truly identifying all of the impacts there. We're saying, well, we'll figure these out afterwards. Well, this is not necessarily fair, and it's not really being fully honest with all impacts, because over the years we've had these little incremental impacts come along where building goes on. Somebody says, well, that's okay because it only represents this, and then pretty soon we get to like an intersection at 213 and Beaver Creek, and somebody says, oh my God, it's at LOSF. Level of service F, where the degradation of the throughput of people coming through. So this becomes another example of incrementalism, where we're bringing in or allowing or not really addressing or identifying what these impacts might be. But as we look at this full Park Place concept plan, we could be all of a sudden having a road coming out of here down Livesey, connecting on to Redland Road. And Redland Road, if we were to take it from Holly Lane down and create a new interchange at 213, because of incremental transportation impacts, we could be looking at $200 million. The county owns it. They say, hey, we don't have the money. That's an Oregon City problem. I caution you, this is really big money. As a taxpayer, we've got to be responsible. I would love to see, and I've already mentioned to the developer in the past, a LID or some type of financing overlay that comes back and gives us, the taxpayers, protection for incrementalism that could come in and end up where somebody could say, oh, you approved this, and now all of a sudden, who's going to pay? And an LID or an overlay over these types of areas like we have identified in the Park Place concept plan that could be potentially annexed are this exact example of significant impacts that could hit every one of us at the bottom line. Thank you.
Thank you. Invite the applicant to come forward.
A limited local improvement district.
Come forward, yes.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and members of the commission, my name is Ryan O'Brien. I'm a planning consultant. I'm representing the applicant. Staff has already reviewed almost everything that we probably need to say, but just wanted to mention a couple of things, and that is the last gentleman mentioned about the incremental development. Well, this would be our third attempt at an annexation. Each time we make it smaller, and that we're hoping that this would work. We'd love to, bring in 150 acres, 300 acres, but it's just not possible. It will not be approved by the voters. So we think this is probably the best alternative. It has 3 street stubs. It's the only piece of property in the entire Park Place plan that can develop with city water, sewer, storm drainage because of the adjacent streets. All the other properties, we need to get sewer from different locations, water from different locations, and there's a lot more to it. So we do plan on building an emergency access road at our south end that will connect up to Livesay, but it'll just be an emergency access because Livesay only has one connection. I do want to mention, though, in our report, our submittal, we provided a report prepared by the Home Builders Association. I know it's not really that relevant to the annexation. However, the reason we did that is because the Planning Commission brought up the issue about, well, residential development doesn't pay for itself. But the person that we met with last year from the Home Builders Association is a PhD, and they've done 600 of these studies all throughout the United States, and although the information I provide, which is summary, doesn't really give you the exact data, we're going to get some additional data, and we hope to make a presentation to the City Council before the annexation hearing, also to the Planning Commission. But they're fully convinced that residential development not only pays for itself, but it's actually a net benefit to the city economically. And I provided a little summary. I don't know if you've looked at that information, but it's pretty impressive. And it actually does pay for itself because you don't get any commercial industrial development, you don't get any jobs unless there is residential development. Residential development is what's the key to the whole economic process. So I think that's really important, and to know that. And the city, just initially, the fees to the city alone for the system development fees and the building permits is well over $1 million. And there is a need for some residential development. This is a very, very nice area, and we can have some pretty high-quality housing here. There is a demand for this type of development in this particular location. And it's also the first step of implementing the comprehensive plan where a tremendous amount of money was spent by Metro and the city. They've got years of investment into this area, but we haven't had any development. So I think it's really appropriate. We're hoping for a unanimous decision of the City Council, and we're hoping that between now and the election that we could get more support from the City Council to the community that there really is a need for this. We only need to change 10% of the voters, and this annexation will get approved because it always goes down at a 60-40. So we feel pretty good about our information, and I hope that will be important for the city for us to present the economic data to show that we really do need this residential development. So I think at that I will conclude, turn it over to Kent, because he's got some more stuff to say.
Sure. My name is Kent Ziegler, presently live in West Lynn. Good to see you again, Mayor Neely and fellow commissioners. As you know, I've been involved with this process in the Park Place area for close to 10 years now, and have personally participated in over 30 neighborhood outreach meetings, Planning Commission public hearings, City Council public hearings, Metro public hearings when the areas for future urbanization were being evaluated. Have participated in the charrettes, where we had a tremendous amount of community input that participated in helping us come up with the concept plan, which was then voted on and approved by the city and Metro. And as Ryan alluded to, probably well over $1 million of Metro's monies and the city's staff time and city funds has already been spent in coming up with what was approved. What we're here to do is just kind of take the next step in that process. And as we all know, you crawl before you walk before you run. This was obviously the best location for us to start because we do have all the utilities stubbed in. The land is fairly level. There's no hazard areas on it. But more importantly than that, one of the reasons why we wanted to go ahead and start working in this area is there's some very, very obvious public safety hazards that exist in the Park Place area. This land was brought into the urban growth boundary in the 1980s, this particular parcel that we're asking for annexation. The reason why it was brought into the 80s is because the city planners and the group involved at that time recognized that there were deficiencies in Livesey Road and the Park Place area. The north side of that big green canyon that you see had to go through an emergency annexation into the city because of a tremendous amount of failing septic tanks. We now have failing septic tanks on the south side of Livesey. There have been notices posted in people's backyards by the appropriate municipalities and agencies saying, don't touch this water. This is contaminated water. We already know that a number of the homes that back up to the canyons off of Livesey also probably have failing septic tanks and drain fields. They just haven't been noticed for it yet. In addition, if you look up at the very top, you'll notice that the white areas, the existing city neighborhoods where citizens live that are paying property taxes into the city right now. You'll also notice there's only one road in to that group of neighborhoods. Well, that's in violation of your own code. Normally, in talking with staff, they would say that once you go past 350 feet, you have to have some type of another secondary access for emergency vehicles, fire trucks, ambulances, police cars. Now, there is another access, but it would not support those type of vehicles to be able to get to those communities. So you're in those subdivisions are in violation. What we're trying to propose now is to try to solve that by, as what Ryan alluded to, a secondary vehicular access. If you look on these exhibits that we have over here on the wall, fortunately that one should be going up and down, but if you look at the one that's colored, you can kind of see where the red dotted lines continue on down the hill to connect up with the existing road of Livesey, which could be used then as a secondary access for fire trucks. Also, Livesey, again, working with the benchmark of 350 feet is the maximum that most planning departments like to go before they require a secondary access. I had my surveyor measure the length of Livesey, and just because I was curious, because it's a dead end.
Mm-hmm.
Dear Mrs. Ziegler, as requested, the approximate distance along South Livesey Road from South Redland Road to the north end, where the last house is 5,740 lineal feet. Buckle and Associates surveying firm. Well, obviously, that's way in violation of what would be allowed in a normal jurisdiction. For some reason, neither the county or whoever else that oversees this area has just neglected this since the 80s. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the road's in bad shape. They don't have street lights. They don't have sidewalks. You've got failing septic tanks. In addition to that, if you remember last year, those of you that may have heard it, one of the neighbors complained about the water. We had it tested. This was done by Alexa Analytical Laboratories, and a copy of this is in your report. And this was done May 29th of 2010. And the comments from this analyst is, water tastes bad, smells bad, water line is an old asbestos line from the 1940s. Okay? So recognizing that, the city took upon itself to go ahead and do an analysis of what can we do to fix this, another public safety problem that exists in the Park Place area. This letter is dated January 27, 2010, from City of Oregon City, and a copy of this should also be in your packet. Livesey Road Water System Improvements. Dear property owner, the Livesey Water Pump Station located at the end of Livesey Road was built many years ago to pump potable water to the properties north of Livesey Road. As you are likely aware, the pump station is aging and becoming unreliable, with water service interruptions occurring a few times each year. In the summer of 2009, the City of Oregon City hired an engineering consultant, Black & Veatch, to prepare an alternative analysis to help the city best determine the most economical way to improve performance and efficiency to our customers. As a result of the alternative analysis, the city is now looking at the possibility of abandoning the existing pump station and extending the water line at Cattle Drive, which is the city subdivision up above, to the south to serve the customers currently served by the pump station. Although this water line would be temporary until development of this area occurs, such a water line would require that the city obtain temporary construction permits, permanent utility easements, and a permit of entry from all owners of the property until the new water line would be located. Well, that's great, but who's going to pay for that? The cost estimate that came in on that, if we were to actually provide fire flow, because right now the hydrants don't work on Livesey. There's no water in the hydrants. We've had a house burned down already. Mm-hmm. So we go, okay, well, what would it cost the citizens of Oregon City if the city went ahead and did what Black & Veatch, their consultants, outlined. Said then this is to provide fire flow also, in addition to potable water. The budgetary cost of a packaged pump station that provides service flow only is $380,000. The cost of a packaged pump station that provides service flow as well as fire flow is $470,000. It was assumed that either of these alternatives would require basic maintenance. Assuming one operator spends 4 hours per week maintaining the pump station, the operational cost for this alternative is approximately $12,500 a year. Okay, so here we've got a possible extra cost to the citizens of Oregon City of approximately $500,000. On top of that, they say we're only going to put it in a temporary easement, so we might be ripping it out down the road. We propose, as outlined on the map up there, we see how the roads can be extended from the 3 roads that are already stubbed in. Why not just allow us to develop the roads in a permanent location, dedicate the right-of-way to the city? You don't need to get temporary construction easements. We pay for it. And I'll say that again, the property owners pay for it, so the citizens of Oregon City save that potential $500,000, and you don't have to tear it out. To me, that's a very obvious benefit to the city. In addition, it gets the roads closer down the hill to go ahead and provide that secondary vehicular access for fire trucks. So, all in all, I think there's a lot of very positive reasons why this annexation should go forward to the citizens. Again, we're not asking for zoning right now. This is just a step in the process. We still have to come in front of the Planning Commission again when we ask for entitlements and permits. But rather than having all that investment just be a piece of paper that really means nothing, we're asking for the right to at least go forward. And as Ryan alluded to, we would definitely appreciate any and all support from the commissioners in that effort. Do you have any questions?
Any questions?
I actually do of Mr. O'Brien.
Yeah.
So we don't have to call you back up. I'll ask it now.
Okay.
You made reference to the Metro HBA housing document, which is on our the last document. I did spend some time with this file, and I wanted to draw your attention to it, or maybe walk us through it, because I, at least in my first read of it, don't see where it establishes that residential development pays for itself.
It doesn't. I was when I went to the seminar, the person that produced this study, he said it, and he showed all the statistical data, but then when I read it, I felt the same thing. It doesn't say that. So we're asking for some additional data from him, because this was specifically for the Portland metropolitan area study. And
now, did you ask for that additional data for this annexation application?
Well, I haven't got it yet. What we've asked the city to do is that we can present something as a different agenda item, just for information only, to show.
So you don't want us to continue this hearing pending your
I don't
receiving
want to continue
that information?
We don't think it's that important. It's just, this is sort of a sideline thing. It's not really necessary, I don't think, for the annexation approval from the city council, but I think it'd be good for the city to know, because that was the major objection of the neighbors, the people that voted, that it's an economic loss to the city for having an annexation. And I think what we're going to try to do is prove to you between now and the election, I'm trying to get this data from the people back in Washington, D.C., to show you that really is an economic benefit to the city.
I see. Okay.
So that's what we're going to try to do, but I just don't have the data yet. But I was told this, but at the seminar, and they showed the statistics for the PowerPoint presentation, but this study doesn't actually say it. It just tells you how much money will be generated, but it doesn't tell you the other equation, that is, how much does the city spend on residential development in order to maintain it. I mean, how much is generated and how much they spend. I don't know. We're hoping to get that information.
That's good information to have.
I think it would be real good information.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
And I'd just like to add that if you're going to try to use that information as persuasive for our particular city, you might want to rely less on a study from Washington or people from there and look more at what we spend here, because this time-old debate in virtually every community I've served has always been, does growth pay its way? And as the city attorney is noted for saying, it depends. And it really depends upon a lot of local factors that are unique to your particular city. One of those would be if you think your tax rates, for example, are adequate to pay for the services that you provide. Do you think your fees for services and SDCs and other things are up to date and calculated based on current rate studies and conditions of your infrastructure? And if you believe that your tax rate is high enough to recover your costs of services and those other fees are adequate to recover those costs, and the applicant is going to be paying those, then in theory, growth is paying its way. If you don't believe those are adequate, then they're probably not paying their way.
Well, you just hit the nail on the head for me, Mr. Fraser, regarding what I struggle with on applications like this.
Yeah.
Because what I ask myself is, given our community and our costs and our tax rates, is it possible to analyze and quantify a given proposal as to whether, in that instance, development is paying its way?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that the way we're analyzing this, we have an answer to that. I think we're not looking at numbers, we're not looking at quantitative analysis that makes a determination. I think as a commission, we're being asked to make a judgment call.
Well, of course, that burden is on the applicant if they want to try to demonstrate that to you. And this is it also depends on the individual development as to whether it's going to pay its way, and is it commercial or residential, and it's a very unique situation with each application. So that burden is on the applicant to demonstrate that to the commission and more broadly to the community. So it takes, I think, a very careful and thorough analysis of this situation. It also, you have to look at today, but also into the future. And your SDCs are tied to future needs, so you do have some science to back that up. But as we all know, things can happen in the city that are hard to predict, and whether or not your tax rates are going to be adequate in the future, and whether or not people in the annexed area would support those increases and ballot measures and other things that come along, are all part of it. But annexation always brings benefits, and it also brings consequences. So it's always a trade-off. So I just wanted to add that, especially for you, because I didn't want you to do. It sounded like you might be relying on that information from Washington, and I think it would be more persuasive for you, and you'd use your energy better if you tried to focus more on the local.
Yeah, that's what we're planning on doing. And I think I might mention that this financial analysis is not really a criteria for the annexation.
That's right.
Because there's also a lot of intrinsic benefits by having some additional people in the community, because that also spurs a lot of economic development, employment, jobs, etc. And that's what's really important. But I think if we're annexing 300 acres, I think it might be really important to the city, what you're talking about. But this is really small. I don't think it really matters that much.
But what I'm concerned about,
yeah,
Mr. O'Brien, is, and I think the staff report makes reference to it in certain points, that in going back to the past two elections where this has, in 2008 and then I think 2009, and the size of the annexations have gotten smaller because the voters have rejected the larger ones. But I think there's also an issue of trying to make a case on a piecemeal basis instead of on a holistic basis, and making a judgment call on each case. That's really, it's kind of hard. It's hard to do. I don't envy your guys' position at all. If I were in your place, you guys have spent a ton of money on this. There's no doubt about it.
Well, so has the city.
So has the city. But so as an elected, I have to try to, and when we do elections, we don't take polls or written polls. I have to try to infer what the voters are communicating to us when they turn these annexations down sequentially, even though they do get smaller, and whether that trend is just we're heading there again in November, and how we can make this different, so that if we do send it to the voters, we're making progress on whatever we might infer they were trying to tell us. And I have some ideas on that I'll get to later in the discussion. But what I do wrestle with is I think I went to planning school, and I think it's possible to set up a system where when you have an annexation, you can quantify through your SDC methodologies some of the data you have on growth and job creations, various studies that have been done on infrastructure costs, whether a particular annexation is going to provide a net benefit or it's going to provide a net cost ultimately to the community. And that's what I'm wrestling with right now.
I just wanted to add something that there is 40% of the voters that did vote in favor of it. So that's a pretty good number, although 60% voted against. But we're going to be around for a long time, and this is just sort of our start. And like I said before, what we're hoping to do between now and November is to actually, the city, I guess the city commission has kind of taken a neutral position. Yes, they've approved the annexation, but it's kind of been neutral. They haven't really promoted it. And what we're hoping is that we could show you the data where you could actually feel comfortable actually promoting it and being in favor a little bit more, I guess. Because, and it may not be important necessarily for the small one, but I think the bigger one is really important that this council feels that will be.
I would want to be able to do it on the smaller ones, because if we only did it on the bigger ones, that would allow, developers to come in and just keep, proponing small piecemeal annexations to avoid analysis.
Well, before this is a little bit different, because if we go further south, we have to go all the way down to Highway 213 to get sewer. It's going to cost well over $1 million to do that. So this is the only one that we can do, because it's the only one that has gravity sewer. So, but we're going to go ahead and do the next step, and that is start looking at the economic analysis for the rest of the property. And this is just sort of our start. So that's where we're at. Because that seems to be the big issue with the city and the voters, is what is the economics of development. We kind of want to know ourselves, too. So
Exactly.
And a couple
I
other
think
things.
you're on the right track, though.
And I appreciate all your
Commissioner
comments, Commissioner Nocita, because I agree with you 100%. And I do feel that once we have a chance to get the additional exhibits to back up the summary results that are in this study, then we'd like to be able to make a follow-up presentation either in this venue or in a workshop session to be able to explain that and go through it page by page. The other thing I was just going to mention, because at the Planning Commission public hearing, and they did vote unanimously, the ones that voted unanimously to send it on to you.
There was an abstention, I understand.
Yeah, one abstention, yeah.
Right. So as I said, the ones that voted, I guess voted absentee, and just didn't vote yes or no. But it was brought up that there seems to be a real lack of park space up here in the Park Place area. And I remember at one of the previous public hearings, Mayor Neely, he was a city commissioner then, also commented that he would like to see more park space added up here because there seems to be a real lack of it. South End Road has Chapin Park and a lot of parks up in that area. And throughout the rest of the city, you'll find numerous parks. And you notice all the area in white, those are people that are paying property taxes. Part of their property taxes are supposed to go for a park.
Mm-hmm.
Also, when those people built their homes or bought their homes, they paid a park SDC. They never got a park. They're still waiting for their park. What we're proposing to do, again, is eventually work down the hill so they get what they're paying for that every year in property taxes, and they don't have anything to show for it. How much is that hurting them when they go to sell their home and they're competing against somebody else in Rivercrest or elsewhere who have parks? And the people looking to buy their home say, well, where do I take my kids to play? Street? Well, I guess, because we never got our park. So hopefully, we can kind of keep moving in that direction.
The other thing is, in addition to the SDCs and the police fee, we also pay an excise tax on all new construction that goes to the school district. As you probably know, the grade school in the Park Place area had to close. Well, one of the positives that comes out of bringing more families into Park Place, in addition to the property tax revenue that comes into the city, you also get this excise tax that could then possibly help reopen that grade school. The school's there. It exists. You don't have to build it. So you might as well take advantage of the fact that you've got this structure that's already existing. It, hopefully put some more teachers back to work. And also just a little bit more on the revenue situation. In Oregon City, as you probably know, there are a lot of churches, there are a lot of county buildings, and none of those pay property taxes. In addition, a lot of the existing homes in Oregon City were built quite some time ago. And in our state, property tax revenues have a limit of 3% annually that you can increase property taxes. So when they're on the tax rolls already at a fairly low value, and you can't raise it except more than 3%, even though other homes within the city are selling for a lot more, you're actually providing the same services for the people who live in that home, but you're not receiving the revenue as those people, as compared to somebody building and buying a brand new home, goes on the tax rolls for the city at a higher basis, which is where you then have your bench beginning threshold for those 3% annual increases. That's revenue to the city. They use the same amount of services as the people in the older homes, but you're getting a lot more property tax revenue out of the people in the newer homes. For that simple reason, they're going on the assessment levels at a higher basis. So there's a lot of ways that new homes do actually generate revenue. Excise taxes, property taxes, SDCs, and just the ripple effect of having families there that go spend their incomes in your community. It's just kind of my feeling.
I have a question. It's a different one. I remember when you were here before an annexation request, before we had testimony from an individual that lived on Livesey. I don't think he was part of your annexation, but was in favor of it because I believe it was at the time of the flood. Livesey was cut off. They had an emergency situation. They had no way, road access to address that issue.
In fact, he's the one that had the water report done. George Thomas was his name.
Yes. My question is this. First of all, the emergency access is actually going to be on county land, I presume.
It would be now, yes, but
my question is this: if, in fact, this is part of the development request, what has to be done by the county to have the emergency access built out?
Built out?
Yeah, emergency access going through county land. How does that occur as part of this annexation request?
Well, it's really kind of a property owner directed. If we can go ahead and extend the city public roads down further towards Livesey Road, which is what the area in the red mark does, then we don't have to go much further to go ahead and connect to the existing county road of Livesey. So we as property owners would just build that out of our own pockets.
Okay. I get you talked about a dotted line, which I did not see and do not see.
Well,
a red dotted line.
Yeah, it's basically on this map right here. Here's the subject property that's being proposed for annexation. Here's where George Thomas lives. The fellow that had to drive through the 3 feet of water when he had his heart attack. The goal would be, and here's the dotted line. I know it probably doesn't show up real well, but if we can go ahead and build these roads as public right-of-ways, instead of having to build a secondary access from clear up here, where the existing public city right-of-ways in now, all we have to do is build it from down here through George Thomas's property or through other property to get to this existing access. And then, and here's Livesey Road.
Yep.
So that's, not only does it provide a secondary access for him through the existing city subdivisions in case that's blocked due to flooding or whatever reason.
So his property has access to Livesey Road, But what you're doing
Yes.
is you're providing an access for that particular piece of property.
And
For
Mr.
the-
Triplett, who is sitting here in the front row earlier, but there you are. Colstrip, I'm sorry, excuse me. He lives right here.
And so you would be getting permission from those property owners to construct this emergency access.
Yeah, and it's not, again, we're not building this to full county or city
I
standards.
understand this.
Right.
Okay. So this is, I just want to be clear on this because the question that's coming through my mind is what would prevent residents from using this emergency access to get onto Livesey Road? Now, what you're saying to me is this actually would be serving on those property owners' land the access for those property owners. That is, it's still essentially in private domain.
Right, and there are a lot of ways that you could control who has access to it. You could do a breakaway barrier, just like you have at stub roads right now. The 3 streets that the city has stubbed into the subject property, there's breakaway wood barricades there. Well, that's something a fire truck could drive through if you needed to get to an emergency situation, but doesn't necessarily allow the general public to go through it.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
At this point, are there any other questions?
I'll hold mine.
Okay. We'll be taking, was that a nod? You had other questions or not at this point?
No.
Okay. We'll go, that being the case, if you have another comment, we'll come back to public comment. After the public comment, of course, the applicant would be in a position to rebut any comment that has occurred before, including the ones that preceded your presentation.
Yes.
I'm sorry for that mistake.
Oh, that's fine. We can
So-
put our names in.
With that, well, no.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
We have a specific order in which things are occurred in public hearings, and I was not following them. So with that, I have next Tom O'Brien and Bob Haskell for public comment.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Tom O'Brien, Oregon City. I had a couple comments regarding this particular application. Several months ago, our Community Development Director had a conversation here amongst the Commission members and himself regarding the urban growth boundary expansion effort. And as my memory serves me correctly, the comments that Mr. Kunkel made at that time included the reasons why we were not pursuing additional effort in behalf of requesting more urban growth boundary be submitted here in the area. At that time, he gave some numbers and some figures relative to the available amount of buildable properties that are already in the city and the number of applications that had been submitted for new building construction. I would suggest that you may want to get an update from Mr. Kunkel regarding whether or not some of those conditions that he described as rather dismal in terms of outlook for new residential property have changed to any significant degree before proceeding. Also wanted to address the fact that I recognize that this is an important part of the Park Place concept plan and will eventually come to fruition, but I have a concern about what that urgency is right now relative to what we know to be a rather soft economy here in the area. We have lost some significant tax revenues with the mill closure, and I think that it would be a really difficult thing right now to ask a developer to prove the value of an annexation or of any application of that nature. Also wanted to mention that in my particular case, I live in the Hazel Grove Westling Farm neighborhood, and this is a little bit in rebuttal to Mr. Ziegler. He's talking about accessibility to parks, etc. My home was built 15 years ago. There were SDCs in place at that time for park We don't have a park in our neighborhood, and I continue to pay taxes every year, happily supporting those parks which the city does have. I'm pleased to see that we have a good number of parks in other neighborhoods. I hope eventually we'll have one in our area, but I recognize that we must wait sometimes for all good things. Thank you.
Thank you. This is Mr. Haskell.
My name is Bob Haskell, and I live in Oregon City. And I would like to express my concerns about the traffic that would be generated through here. As was pointed out, Winston is the only access to this area currently. And also, as pointed out, there are no parks. And the question was asked, where do the children play? In the streets? And the answer is absolutely yes. The children do play in the streets, and the additional traffic would put them at, I think, an additional risk. There was an accident just the other day on one of those corners with a child running into a truck. And so I would, we talk about the parks will be in the future and the streets will be in the future, but how far into the future? And how much risk are we being put at, and how much additional congestion is being generated until the public accesses get through and until the parks get through. So I would really urge you to consider this factor. Thank you.
I have now Christine Kaczynski for public comment.
Mr. Mayor, if those are going to be part of the record, whatever that is, can we make sure the recorder gets copies?
Yes.
Okay.
Before I begin, can I ask a question?
You can ask a question, yes.
Would you allow me to submit to you Governor Kitzhaber's study and Eben Fedor from Eugene's study on the cost of development?
Presumably.
You can receive new testimony.
Yeah.
The issue is, do you want to...
These are just printed
If
facts.
it's available here, then you ought to put them in the record.
Are they here?
Thank you.
Yes.
My name is Christine Kaczynski. I live in unincorporated Clackamas County. In the annexation application, it is stated the cost of interior streets and public utilities will be paid by the developer of the property. The entire Park Place plan is huge. Who will pay the millions of dollars needed for the transportation infrastructure necessary to service this entire area? I'm speaking now of the big picture, not just the 6.5 acres. The city nor the county has any money for new roads. The taxpayers are tapped out. Transportation and traffic was the third core value in this concept plan. Once built out, the Park Place plan will add 20,000 average daily trips per day, with the Beaver Creek concept plan adding upwards of 31,000 per day. This is a huge amount of proposed traffic in an area with only 3 roads currently to service it and no money for any new roads. The city has been negligent by not notifying all homeowners in the Trailview subdivision. I have provided you with a picture of a map designating a huge vehicle transportation corridor which was planned by Oregon City. If you look at the map below Glen Oak Road, that's Henrici. That would be the beginning of the road, which is blue and pink. And if you follow it all the way up to Thayer Road and Maple Lane, over to Holly, and then it ends into Holcomb. The homeowners in Trailview used their hard-earned money to buy a home here. This was their dream, and now you come along and propose to build a superhighway in their very backyards, which will create large amounts of cut-through traffic, and you say you don't have to notify them. I say you are breaking Goal 1 requirements by not providing safe neighborhoods for your citizens. And although the proposed 6.5 acres of this annexation is only 5% grade, this area is still not out of the woods regarding landslides. Study the LiDAR maps. At the bottom of this hill, just under the proposed development, lies a plethora of absolutely huge, deep-seated, historic, active, ancient, and prehistoric landslides. If these landslides reactivate, what will happen to the homes above? We already know what history has taught us in Oregon City. Building above slides can be very dangerous. Dogami has completed your LiDAR landslide maps, and in about 4 years, they will have your susceptibility maps available. The LiDAR maps will show where landslides have already occurred. Susceptibility maps will indicate for future development where land is susceptible to fail in the future. It may be good to wait until the susceptibility maps are finalized to see if this challenging area is in fact developable. And then I wanted to end with the $3,500 fee for police. This application states, at least the application I read, that the additional $3,500 fee for police for these 30 added homes may not be necessary. However, again, looking at the large picture, when the concept plan is built out to 1,570 homes, this is a very large amount of money for the developers to pay, in addition to the other fees they already pay. Developers cannot absorb these added costs, and therefore, many of them will be forced to put the $3,500 onto the price of each home. Do you know how much this will cost the homeowner? $3,500 onto the price of a home with a 6% interest rate on a 30-year amortization comes to a whopping $21,079.01 that the homeowner will have to pay back for that $3,500. You are severely penalizing people for moving to Oregon City. I do not believe this voluntary fee is ethical, but I do believe it is just one more reason for people not to move here. I hope you abolish this aberrant ruling before it causes further problems. It is difficult for me to support this proposed annexation when considering these concerns and the fact that the city is not building livable and safe communities. And lastly, I would like to add that the homes in Crabtree Terrace at the end of Holly Lane, where it intersects with Maple Lane, those homes were built to sell for $339,000. They're now down to $239,000. There's foreclosures everywhere. Do we really need more homes? Or like our federal government, are we finally going to start looking at jobs? Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if there are those studies, now's the time to put them in the record.
Yeah, but please.
Do you have them?
I do not. I didn't know that this was going to come up tonight, but I have them on my computer.
Okay. So to get them in the record, would we have to continue this?
If you want them in the record, you'll have to continue.
Yeah.
Just a procedural question.
I will get them to you as soon as possible, in or out of the record. Thank you.
And I gave
we
Nancy
have Tom Guile wishing to speak. If there's anybody else wishing to speak, please indicate so with the city recorder.
Good evening. Tom Guile, Oregon City resident. I'm not here pro or con to make any arguments one way or another. I did want to point out a couple things. As as you come in Winston Drive there and you turn to the right, there's a pocket, there's a corner house right there. And this last weekend, all the residents, or most of the residents of Trailview, gathered together to talk about issues impacting them. And there was a lot of concern, as I've heard expressed tonight, about heavy traffic. If this their concern was that if this annexation takes place, there's no other way for construction trucks to build roads. The roads, number one, all the equipment coming through,
as well as future homes. Their concern is that any traffic coming in Winston Drive has to either turn right or left at that T to move around. And I heard it expressed tonight, there are no parks in that area. There is one down at Park Place School, but mostly the school buses, Holcomb Elementary School's at the neck there, and then school buses drop kids off here at the corner. School buses come down through Trailview streets there, and there was a big amount of concern about all the traffic because there's only one way in, one way out of that area, and a lot of that traffic takes place when their kids are on the streets, either coming or going to school. That's just expressing their concerns. But on the one thing, every annexation that's come up, and I've said the same thing, is that emergency roads are great for the people that need them there, but Redland Road itself needs to be fixed. If it's flooding, how's that fire truck going to even come up there to break down that barrier? That until Redland Road is fixed, and I've said it before, my dad worked for the Corps of Engineers, and he worked around the dams in Oregon and Washington, and they knew that if they had major roads that flooded in the gorge or other places, they needed to raise those elevations. So no matter what we do in any of that area, until Redland Road itself is fixed, we're going to have problems with people all further out Redland Road, Livesey Road, no matter where. So I hope that the city, county, or whoever starts looking at the best ways to handle the traffic and the flooding on Redland Road. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Now something's happened here, so I better check. That was the last comment, and now is the time for rebuttal from the applicant.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and members and commissioners, I just have a couple comments that I'd like to make. We do have a study that was prepared by the Home Builders Association again about new housing, and so actually right now there's a critical shortage of new housing, even though you may not see it because of the sales and everything. Actually, demand for new housing kind of goes like this: it's based on population and other factors. People aren't buying new houses right now because they can't sell their existing homes, and there's some other factors, but the demand keeps growing. They said there's a critical shortage right now, and these are three economists that were hired by the Portland Metropolitan Home Builders that presented this information. They said in 2 years there's going to be a critical shortage. There's going to be a lack of people, lack of residential lots. There's going to be a lack of builders that can actually build the houses, craftsmen, because the demand just keeps going. The longer we go in this recession that we're going, the higher the demand is going to be later on. So our project is going to be 2 years out before you're going to have it available for houses with the zone change and everything else that we have to do. So we're really looking at about a 2-year period. And I also want to admit that Christine, I didn't get her last name, but the lady that was up here was talking about the Park Place master plan. We're only talking about 6 acres here. I mean, it's pretty small, and her comments are kind of mostly related to that. There is going to be substantial residential, street improvements that are going to be required when the entire area annexes, but I don't think that's going to be an issue right now. But I do want to mention one thing. She mentioned something about landslides, and we do have a map that's in the last of our report. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but we have a cross slope of about 3%. This is really a pretty flat piece of property. At the southwest corner, we're approaching closer to 10% for just a small piece, but I don't think there's any landslide potential here whatsoever. So that's all I have.
Okay. And really, I only have one comment also, and it's just a follow-up to what Mr. Guile, Tom, shared about fixing Redland Road. And obviously, I don't think any of us would get in the way if the state, the federal government, or the county, or somebody wanted to come in and spend money to raise Redland Road. But the reality of that situation is that's not practical. You're dealing with a floodplain down there. You've got some other sensitive issues that would need to be addressed and dealt with. So even though that may be something that we would all appreciate and would like to see happen, we have to look at, well, what can we do? What is available that solves this public safety hazard that presently exists? Yes, Livesey Road does flood from time to time in the wintertime where it intersects with Redland Road. We've got documented pictures of that.
The road was closed for 3 days a few years ago. They had the barricades across. You couldn't even get through. However, at the intersection of Livesey and Holcomb and Abernathy, not Livesey, Redland, Holcomb, and Abernathy, it doesn't flood. It's higher in grade. Well, that's what allows people to get up to Holcomb. That's what allows people to have a secondary access to get into that whole community of homes that is on Livesey, is they are not flooded out. I've never seen that intersection except in 96.
96.
It was all in the water. It was in water, 96.
Which was unfortunately flooded just about everywhere. So obviously that can't happen. But typically, when in the winter rains, when the Abernathy floods, and it periodically does, it will not impact that intersection. So you go, okay, well, what is practical and feasible, and what can we do? Because we know we've got an obvious problem here. Well, by allowing us to come in from up on top at the higher elevation, we can now provide that secondary access to get to all those homes. I've heard people give testimony where they were stuck on Livesey Road for a week and couldn't get out. And they had to walk down the hills to try to get food. George Thomas, who, as I mentioned, had the water report done, his wife is the one that's in the wheelchair. She needs to get her medication. She needs to get to the hospital for treatment. There has to be a way for them to be able to get out 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And what we're trying to, or what we're proposing to do, is offer a very affordable solution to that is property owner driven, paid for by the property owners, not the city. So that's my only comment on fixing Redland Road.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments at this time? We're going to have Peter Walter to come up, but I do have a question here. In terms of the annexation, if the commission set it forth, how can the condition of this emergency access be placed in when it's not part of the city?
I think this would be one thing that I'll respond to before I bring Pete up to kind of try and bring everything back together. Pete's going to walk through the 7 annexation criteria. Right now, you have a proposal to bring in a vacant piece of property with no comprehensive plan or city zoning on it. While the discussion went much larger than what the actual application was, when we start talking about specific street locations, access, we're not there. This isn't a subdivision application. We haven't addressed the jurisdictional issues. I guess I'd just ask that we try and focus back on the 7 approval criteria. You heard a lot of testimony tonight that was very wide-ranging, and the 7 criteria are very broad. But when we talk about specific design of a site, this isn't a subdivision application.
And there's nothing in the criteria that actually addresses the Livesey emergency road access to people that are not in the city at all?
No, Livesey Road is in Clackamas County. It has been in Clackamas County. It was designed well before there were standards for street lengths to deal with fire protection. This is why we do larger comprehensive plans and concept plans, is to look at these issues. But right now we're focusing on a 6.5 acre vacant piece of property.
Right. Okay, thank you. So we're going to ask Peter Walter to come up and to go again through the factors that we're supposed to be considering in this process. And I think a lot of the things that are here, as you're pointing out, are things that are not dealt with at this point.
Right.
And before Pete starts, I need to respond to a couple things. When Chief Harris was here, we received routinely that there were inadequate police services to service the annexed area if it's developed. So the private developers came to the city and sat down with Chief Harris and said, what can we do to address your concern? And this is where the voluntary agreement to pay per household was made. We've heard continuously tonight that we want the developer to pay for their impacts. So the developer comes in, works with the city to come up with what seems to be a way to accommodate the concern and it gets categorized as a broad. So you're right, it's inequitable. Would it be great to put it on every house in the city that gets constructed, if that's the policy that the city commission wanted? That's a discussion that the city commission would need to have, but it wasn't an option. We were trying to address annexations that were adding to the city limits. Homes that are already in the city limits abide by the policies that this commission sets up. You set the tax rate, you set the service levels. And then this goes to what Commissioner Nocita was talking about in terms of the economic analysis of, is this going to pay off, is this a benefit to the city? Well, what if the analysis comes off and you need $1 million home because of Measure 5 and 50 to have a benefit to the city at the tax rate you have chosen and the citizens have chosen to apply in the city? It's a circular argument. Do you raise the tax rate to cover the services? Because Mr. Ziegler does make a valid point that when Measure 5 and 50 came in, it capped those values, the assessed value, held it to 3% per year unless there were special bond measures passed, and the market value has highly increased it. That's why in this recession, most people haven't seen their property taxes go down but up, because the assessed value is so far below the market value that there is plenty of 3% steps in there. He also brings up the point that if you bring in a $400,000 home, I think Measure 50 rolls it back to 75% of that, so you'd be taxing it on $300,000. So that is an increase right there of what you're historically going to see in some areas of the city. So the economic benefit, while I agree, there's many things that you can look at, but how you actually quantify that, and in the end, you set the policy. You set the tax rate, you set the service level. All they can do is build a house that comes in at the rate you've applied. And if that doesn't meet your service level, what do you do then? You either build a bigger house or you raise the tax rate. Concerning system development charges and impacts on the transportation system, when we went through and we did the Park Place concept plan, the Beaver Creek concept plan, as Pete mentioned, we went through and we updated, we identified all of the infrastructure needs that were calculated. The next step that we need to do, which we put onto the developer, was to show transportation planning rule compliance. But the way we did the plan was to be compliant. So we've identified what improvements are necessary. This is a very, very difficult one in Oregon City because of our location and the larger area that we serve. We have I-205 with 2 interchanges, both at 99E and 213. 213 is a major north-south connection for not only Oregon City, but the rest of Clackamas County. So we took the step of not only applying system development charges to the local transportation improvements that we needed, we added the state facilities. And we said, well, it's not fair that a developer in Oregon City has to pay 100% of the state facility because we're serving a much larger area than just Oregon City. So we set it at, I think, 33%. So if it's $1 million, we take 33% of that, and that got included in our system development charges to cover the state facilities so that we would have a match and say, okay, we've been collecting on this state, we've got a pot, we've got money in our SDCs that we're collecting, so that we can then go after federal funds and state funds to make those larger state improvements which serve the whole region. To expect concurrency or a developer to pay to fix the state system, you can certainly do it, but you are severely dampering development opportunities in Oregon City to subsidize trips outside the county, outside the city limits. Because when you look at the trips that on 213, I think the last time we did this, 45% of those trips don't start or stop in Oregon City. They're pass-through trips. So there's an equity issue there that we need to address. Now, if when we do the TPR compliance, if there's a deficiency identified, then we figure out what the remedy is, what the mitigation is, whether that's a proportional share that gets paid towards that, if it's lane configuration. There's multiple opportunities, but that step has been delayed because of our voter annexation process in Oregon City. We felt it was a good process to bring the property up. If it gets voted in, then you go and spend the additional tens of thousands of dollars to do the transportation study. But we do have existing comprehensive concept plan that's identified those improvements. We have a very good idea what they are. We costed them out and we added them to our SDC list. So once again, I'm trying to address some of the issues brought forward that you've heard tonight.
Can I segue from something, because I think you've explained a lot that enlightens me on this stuff, and I want to segue from it because I alluded to something I wanted to bring up earlier, and this is a perfect place, I think, to bring it up. And I would direct the commission to pages 11 and 12 of the staff report. And I want to, down at the bottom of page 11, where it says section 14. Section 14 of the Oregon City Comprehensive Plan is entitled Urbanization. Several policies in this section are pertinent to proposed annexations. The following excerpts expand on the city's annexation philosophy and requirements. And I want to read this for folks in the audience and watching, because I think when I read this, it just kind of crystallized some of the issues that we confront in trying to wrestle with these annexation decisions. It reads in italicized text. The city is required to refer all proposed annexations to voters. Rather than having voter approval of individual property owners' requests to annex, the city should prepare and implement an annexation plan and program. The city could then annex large blocks of properties, parentheses, with voter approval, at one time, rather than in a piecemeal fashion. Annexation would be tied more directly to the city's ability to provide services efficiently, maintain regularly city boundaries, and help the city meet Metro's targets for housing and employment. The zoning of the property should be decided at the time the Planning Commission and City Commission review and approve the annexation requests. Applications for annexation, whether initiated by the city or by individuals, are based on specific criteria contained in the city's municipal code. Metro and state regulations promote the timely and orderly fashion of urban services with which inappropriate annexations can conflict. Therefore, an annexation plan that identifies where and when areas might be considered for annexation can control the expansion of the city limits and services to help avoid those conflicts and provide predictability for residents and developers. And I would assume voters, too. Other considerations are consistency with the provisions of this comprehensive plan and the city's public facility plans, with any plans and agreements of urban services providers, and with regional annexation criteria. That's the quoted text from our comprehensive plan. Then the next paragraph, which is, I guess, part of the staff report, says, the city has not prepared an annexation plan and program to facilitate wholesale large block area annexations. Until such a methodology and process is in place, annexation will continue in a piecemeal fashion, such as this proposal. This annexation is still sufficiently tied directly to the city's ability to provide services efficiently with the logical extension of physical utility lines, as it is adjacent to Holcomb Boulevard to the north. And it goes on. So when I've been listening to people comment tonight, like Mr. Maybe, my predecessor, Ms. Kaczynski, Paul Edgar, Mr. O'Brien, Mr. Haskell, and even the developers too, I see a lot of the issues that we wrestle with up here. If we could kind of bring them together kind of holistically in a policy, in an annexation plan, I don't know if we'd be. I want to ask: would we be going through the gymnastics that we typically go through in these smaller annexation decisions on these exact issues like SDCs and the equity issues you talked about? And Tony, why don't you just give us some background on this, how the comprehensive plan, promoted this idea of an annexation plan to control, all of these various annexation proposals, and what has been has it been us, the commission, predecessor commissions, as to why such an annexation plan hasn't been prepared before? Be brutal. Take off the gloves. Just
I think
the unvarnished, rough truth.
I think it was to try and acknowledge that you continue to see these smaller piecemeal developments, and that exactly what was discussed today. It's the incremental slicing, because the subdivision application is so small that the number of trips they put into an intersection during the AM or PM peak are almost negligible. And so it's when you get these smaller subdivisions that continue to come on, you get discontinuous streets. You're not able to properly plan an area historically. Since this was written, when we did the comprehensive plan update, what is different now is that you have concept plans in both Park Place and Beaver Creek, which you lacked historically in Oregon City. There wasn't that long-range planning that looked at local connectivity and transportation improvements. We had what we had. That's what it's been. If a neighbor wanted to annex, they annexed. If it was 2 acres or 4 acres, that's what it was. Canby moved to try and identify areas and rank them. And I believe that was where Canby was moving when we were updating the comprehensive plan. I know that one concern was that everyone remembered not only the Park Place annexation for the sewer failure, but also the island annexation process. And at that point, there was a decision that the city is not going to is not going to go out and force annexation of folks unless they wanted to do it. At which point, the annexation process in Oregon City became completely property owner driven. We didn't go out and advocate for properties to come in. We didn't go out and grab properties if they didn't want to be a part of it. And at that point, that's why you continue to see one property come in at a time, whether it be a half an acre or this one at 6.5 acres. So I think the intent was to do that, to identify these larger areas so that we could long-range plan them correctly and address these larger infrastructure. It just, we did do that through the concept planning process. We took that step. But in terms of the city-initiated annexation of 80 acres, I don't think there's any political will to do that.
But how, I guess I'd have to pose the question on how the city would do that. We do have certain requirements of the annexation policy, unless you're talking about changing those. You have to have majority of residents, majority of property owners, and majority of area, as I recall, are the 3 conditions. And,
I believe the city can.
There is under ORS Chapter 195 something called an annexation plan, where you look long range, you work with the special service districts that might now have jurisdiction with the county, and you can prepare an annexation plan. Largely, and this is about a 10 to 15-year-old set of statutes, largely local governments have not done that. It's expensive, it requires buy-in, and it requires, nobody likes the idea that if you make a plan that will automatically annex them at the end of the day, and in which they'll have some say, because there will be here, that the options are foreclosed. That's a problem. It's a money problem, and it's a political will problem.
Well, the way you phrase it was that the annexation plans under statute kind of preclude or obviate voter approval.
No, they would not. They would not under our charter. The charter is an additional requirement to that. But people still would think that their options are foreclosed if they've signed off on an annexation plan, even though it will go to the voters. And that
It's a perception.
there's a great investment of city time and money to do these plans.
and it requires coordination.
That's what my next question was
Right.
going to be. What is that investment of time and money?
You need to have staff put together the plan. You need to have staff work with affected special districts and the county to sign off on something more than just a basic urban growth boundary. You're actually doing the planning for the area, and you're talking about the sequential annexation and the disposition of the service district territories and revenues. When this was, the closest analog is the East Multnomah County situation, where there was a great distance between Gresham and Portland, and most of the urban services were provided for by special districts. And the only thing that got that property into the two cities, whether that's a good or a bad thing, was the fact that there was a health hazard declared, and there was a requirement that there be an annexation, and some money provided to help the homeowners get off the dry wells and into a sewer system. Lacking that, it probably wouldn't have happened.
Adam, if I might, you're right that that's a very rare situation in Oregon where local governments have done that, and that's in governments that don't have voter-approved annexation, which heightens the risk on return for that investment even further. You know, if our city in particular spent that money and then it wasn't approved by the voters, we would have spent a lot of staff time and money on something that would look like a folly in many ways.
And I guess just to finish, going on, it's been a long time. Mr. O'Brien brought up the discussions we had about the urban growth assessment created by the COO for Metro. And at the time I made that presentation, I think it was September or so of last year. What we were looking at that time was I estimated that we had approximately 740 or 750 approved or platted lots, single residential lots in Oregon City. That included, I believe, about 440 units associated with the Cove development, and an additional 200 units on top of the 100 existing. So it was going to be 300 new units, but 300 total units, but it would have been 200 new units associated with Clackamas Housing Authority. So those have all been approved through the land use process. Those haven't been platted. Clackamas Housing Authority didn't receive their federal funding this year. Hopefully they will, and we'll move that forward project in the near future.
You don't believe they're going to be able to give grants?
They did not receive the grant they requested this year.
Yes, and they do not believe in it.
Oh, they do not.
They do not believe that those funds are going to be
available moving forward.
Yeah.
And I think also we made I discussed that historically from about 01 to 07, we were issuing about 250 single-family housing permits per year. At that point, we were through 2.5 years, and we were averaging about 100. We're right at that number still right now, and on that trajectory, if not a little bit below it. We also considered that we had brought in 950 acres with Park Place, South End, and Beaver Creek Road, and there was an estimate of approximately 2,500 units associated with those three concept planning areas. And based on those factors, that we didn't feel it was appropriate to add the Maple Lane area to the UGB at this time, because with what we had in the city and these three units, we felt we had enough, and we met our 20-year land supply in Oregon City. So that recommendation was based on some of these concept plan areas developing at some point in the future. So going from memory, I think those were the highlights of that presentation. So with that's all the response I wanted to provide. We'd be happy to answer any questions and just have Pete go back to the 7 approval criteria that we're working under.
We had a lot of information that don't apply to those criteria, and I think what we have to do is
I think you need to work your way through them. Yeah, they're very broad, but
yeah.
Yes.
So I just wanted to clarify that the area does have a comprehensive plan designation, medium density residential. So we do have the benefit of that designation in our comp plan. And were there a zone change tied to the annexation, which is the way our code is currently written, we have this default zoning designation which applies to comprehensive plans, which for the medium density category is R3, 5, and R5. And so the applicant would have had to say which one he wanted, but that's not part of this. So briefly, go back through the criteria, which is spelled out in Chapter 14.
Can I interrupt you, Pete? They're not criteria, they're factors.
They're factors.
And that's a big difference.
Yes.
And the
So-
difference is,
And why don't we just put them up and then we can just turn it over to questions.
Criteria are checklists where you got to meet each one of them. Factors are balanced, and you have to come up with a positive balance under our code.
Here we have them. Adequacy of access to the site, conformity of the proposal with the comprehensive plan, including Park Place concept plan, goals and policies, adequacy and availability of public facilities and services, compliance with the Oregon Revised Statutes and the Metro Code for boundary changes, natural hazards identified by the city, any significant adverse effects on specially designated open space, scenic, historic, or natural resource areas by urbanization of the subject property at the time of annexation. And 7, lack of any significant adverse effects on the economic, social, and physical environment of the community by the overall impact of the annexation.
We're talking about of the community, we're talking about the whole city?
Correct. In the staff report, we take the community to mean the existing city limits, including the urban growth boundary.
so items number 2 and 4, that's a big chunk of analysis if you're going to analyze the proposal with the entire comp plan and the entirety of Metro Code 3.09.
I think the sections that we look at specifically for number 2 are the Goal 14, which is urbanization, and also the public facilities section, which is Chapter 11. And I believe starting on pages starting on page 10, we talk about conformity of the proposal with the city's comprehensive plan. We've listed how the proposal would comply with both the Park Place concept plan goals, policies, and implementation strategies. Then we go over to Goal 14.4 on page 12, which is annexation of lands to the city. And I can go into more detail on these if you wish. Policies under that goal, primarily to provide efficient services, adequate services, compact urban form, contiguity with city limits, avoidance of long linear extensions such as cherry stems and flag lots. We have to pay attention to concept plans and sub-area master plans if there are any. We have to look at the fiscal impacts of how they do this. And with the Park Place concept plan, we had Chapter 5, which was a preliminary summation of all of the transportation improvements that would need to be improved upon build-out of the entire 420 acres. And also funding mechanisms that a city would typically pursue in order to implement those, including SDCs and other methods, such as local improvement districts, developer paying their portion primarily. Avoidance of unincorporated islands, and the provision for emergency annexation in the event of public health hazards. Goals, Section 11 having to do with public facilities. It lists water, wastewater, sewer, police services, and fire service. Again, showing a balance of factors that are adequate, efficient, and not requiring overreaching our existing ability to provide those services.
Mr. Mayor,
yes,
I want to actually like to bring the chief into the conversation.
Sure.
Well, wait for a second.
Stepped out
Oh,
for
there.
just a moment.
Okay, when he comes back. while we're waiting for Chief Conrad to come back, I'd like to go to something that Ms. Kaczynski raised about the LiDAR maps. To what, and I don't know if I've asked this recently or not, but to what extent the LiDAR maps that Dogami produced, and I guess like Oregon City was kind of the test case for this mapping, have we integrated those maps fully into our land use decision-making process?
Yes, the way the city uses the data is the same data that's on the web-based version of all our maps. It provides the LiDAR data at 2-foot and 10-foot contour intervals. And I believe the city owns that data through Dogami.
And through the last code update that we did last August, we utilized the LiDAR data, the most recent LiDAR data that we had from the state, and then we also put anywhere from a 50 to 200-foot buffer around both the top and bottom of those slopes. So we've used the most up-to-date data that's available.
And does that data for this site show anything as far as natural hazards that would be a risk to a small subdivision or a moderately sized subdivision?
I'd want to check to make sure that the 200-foot buffer doesn't extend onto the site. I don't believe it does.
That was only around active slide areas.
Yeah. It's active slide areas being those ones that have been identified by Dogami. And then we have these historic landslide areas which had a 50-foot buffer applied to them as well.
And neither of those show up onto this site?
No, I don't believe they do, but I can verify that and check, and I'll provide a response once I check the map.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
why don't I go check that, and I'll come back.
Okay.
That's right here.
So,
Chief has
Chief,
returned.
we wanted to
Yes.
we're going to run some of these questions by you. I tell this story too much that what got me to run for city commission, what pulled my trigger to run, was a police incident. And so, out of all of these, factors, what I'm particularly sensitive to is the question of police response time and annexation and growth spreading out and leading to greater response times. When in 2008, before Chief Conrad got appointed, I had learned from Commissioner Smith, who was campaigning at the same time, that the city had basically doubled in size over the previous 15 or 20 years, and yet the size of its police force had not grown at all. And that's pretty easy math to think if you're going to have that much more land area through annexations and development, you're going to stretch your police force and make response times longer and lead to someone like me feeling trapped in their home while a street brawl is going on inside and thinking the police response time is too long and deciding I got to do something about this and running for office. Since Chief Conrad has come in and become our chief, we have had a very gratifying stream of swearing in new officers and reservists like we had tonight. And I think the community is uniformly gratified at the progress we've made over the last couple of years. So I think I was a little surprised to read in this application that, in fact, we are still dealing with a police deficiency in response time, and that we have to consider measures like the developer's proposing for a per unit fee. One of the issues I have with the fee is that I can't quantify whether $3,500 is sufficient for a problem of long term. I found both Mr. Mabey and Ms. Kaczynski's objections to the fee quite convincing too. But out of these factors, the thing that makes me most reluctant to approve this and send it to the voters, because if based on my personal experience and what I read as a candidate and as a commissioner over the past 2 years, 2.5 years now, as to what people were saying in voting no on these annexations specifically previously, I think that issue of spreading the police thin is up there, and it makes me concerned that without something showing the voters something has changed and is new in the way we review annexations, the way we fund police, that we're just heading for another defeat at the polls. And we've got this very nice concept plan that we're trying to, bring to life. So, I guess maybe this is a question both for the city manager and the police chief. Is what is your view of the situation of the police department's finances, and how future annexations, both for Park Place and because we're facing Beaver Creek too, substantial annexations. Looking at the big picture, are we in a position as a police force to manage it, or is it really going to strain us?
I think an annexation of this size wouldn't put too much additional strain on the police department. Obviously, further annexation of larger areas would. Just to remind the Commission that over the past several years, and you're right, Commissioner Nocita, we have added quite a few officers, and those have come through a couple of COPS grants through the federal government, one from TriMet, which is funded completely, actually about 108% by TriMet. So there's 3 additions right there that the city is not actually paying for now. Now, the 2 COPS grants, it was agreed to when the city accepted those positions, that they would find funding for those after the life of that grant was over with. Also, during the Blue Ribbon Task Force, a goal was set during that it would increase the police staffing level to the state average of 1.5 officers per 1,000. As you heard earlier tonight, we're about 1.33. In order to bring us up to those recommended staffing levels by the Blue Ribbon Task Force, we'd have to hire an additional 5 officers to do that. And those called, under the Blue Ribbon Task Force, it called for that to happen by 2014.
But additional annexations and additional housing units would put downward pressure on that 1.33 average, because it's per 1,000 of population. And if you add more population, you're going to decrease that ratio.
You would. However, and I want to be completely forthright here, is that by adjusting our shifts to go to 10-hour shifts and having an overlap on our shifts, we've made a lot better use of our personnel. So we've actually taken 6 hours out of the day, and we've doubled the number of officers we've had on there. And those are typically, and you can never exactly say when more crime is going to occur than another, but typically it's my opinion that it's better to have more officers on at the time we have scheduled it now, from about 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the morning. But we are fluid enough to be able to adjust that if we think it might be necessary in the future.
Okay.
Commissioner Nocita,
Go ahead.
to answer your question about the 200-foot buffer on the geologic hazard zone, it is outside of that zone.
So this annexation property,
Yeah, it doesn't touch it.
the hazard zone is outside
Yes.
the limits of that.
Correct. Yeah.
Mr. Conkle, in terms of we've had permits drawn that for housing that's not been built in Oregon City. That is because of the recession. We have subdivisions that were not built out.
Correct.
Well, how many housing units have been built per year over the last 2 years? Do you have that?
Over the last 2 years?
Yes.
We're averaging right around 100 per year.
Actually being built?
Yes. building permits issued, yes.
Well, but I'm talking about housing built. I mean, we've issued building permits that have not been acted upon because of the recession. Am I not correct?
At this point, what you're not seeing many homes built on speculation anymore. Most homes sold today are being sold when they have a buyer in hand. The amount of speculation going on right now is minimal. I would, yes, there's probably been a couple building permits that have not been built on, but we're not seeing what we saw when this recession started, where you had a glut of homes or a glut of permits out there that were built on spec, or were going to be built on spec, and either it went to foreclosure or they walked. At this point, you're seeing multiple units bought from the bank-owned lots being bought for however many cents on the dollar, and those developers are then able to come in and build those homes with at a much lower price point, and they're able to move those. So I'm comfortable that it's right. It's probably just under 100 units per year are being constructed.
I've got a feeling we might be asking for a continuance of this. If we do that, I'd like actual figures on that. How many homes have been built per year?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I have a comment that may address part of Commissioner Nocita's concern and may also get to something you may be driving at. Oregon City is a little bit unique, depending on who you compare us to some cities who have already maxed out their ability to adjust tax rates under Measure 50. If your community was one of those, and basically, I think every city eventually, given enough time and enough inaction by the legislature, will eventually find themselves in a position where they cannot afford the services they need to operate. That's the trajectory we are headed on, unless and until the legislature acts. Now, some cities like Oregon City may have decades before you get to that place. So looking at this 6 acres or any other substantially larger annexation, as long as you have room to adjust your tax rates here, I don't think you have a really big concern about whether this 6 acres could pay its way. You do have that concern going in, but assuming your tax rates are close to providing the service levels you need for the rest of the city, if they're not, I guess that the problem is if our rate structure isn't sufficient for that 6 acres, it's not sufficient for anything else in the city. And if it's not sufficient for anything else in the city, I'm going to be coming to you saying, it's not sufficient, we need to adjust our tax rate. And as long as you're not, trapped by one of these measures, like you're not at this time, you've got the ability to adjust that tax rate to make up for that problem. So you have more flexibility, I guess is my point.
Do we have the ability to raise enough revenue through this spread in the tax rate to get to the 1.5 per thousand in our police force?
I don't know. That would take a separate analysis. You have, I think, at least a couple $1 million worth of room right now, and if you look at that 6 acres, that will hire a lot of police officers. So I can say with confidence that you have more than enough room to take care of that 6 acres and probably the other 300.
But I'm not considering it as far as, when you say that, are you talking about the 3,500 per unit?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think the way I'm looking at it is the way that Ms. Kozinski and Mr. Mabey are looking at it. If we dismiss with this fee and look at annexations like we are looking on a scale to, bring the concept plan to life in Park Place and bring the concept plan to life in Beaver Creek. Given those ambitions, is there that room in that spread, just on a bigger picture to get us up to that 1.5 ratio that we all want to get to?
Well, you're not going to know that unless you do a law enforcement master plan, and then much like you would any of your other utility services, you essentially look at law enforcement as a utility. You conduct a master plan, a rate study, if you will, and then you determine whether or not you can or will be able to pass some sort of SDC that's applicable to law enforcement. That would be one one way to, I suppose, make that fee more scientific.
Yeah. Would that be a new program
Or more
under the
scientific.
fire
Yes.
annexation pledge?
How'd you guess? For now, yeah.
And when does that end?
I think we have about 8 months left, something like that.
8 months?
It's. I know that at next year's retreat, I'll be talking to you about that.
I got to say that emergency services are extremely important. I don't question that. They're not the only services we're failing.
That's right.
If you look at our parks,
Yes.
you can see that's the case. And you brought this up, and you brought this up in context of having a parks service fee. Well, I'll tell you, I'm not going to be amenable to increase the rate of our taxes and at the same time create a large increase in our
Right.
utility fees in the process too.
Yeah. You could pick
even though I can't run again, I'd be unwilling to do that kind of thing. So,
And Mayor, it depends on, there just isn't a free lunch, and sometimes I'm in the unenviable position of reminding you there's no free service. How you pay for it, whether it's a parks and open space utility fee or a tax adjustment, you'll probably hear me suggest things like the fee first, because that captures a much broader base of contributors. The more people that are on the bus, the cheaper the bus ticket. You've heard me say that before. And I think it's also much more equitable than simply looking at taxpayers, especially in a city that's got such a large footprint of tax-exempt properties in it. It's more equitable to the rest of the taxpayers to use that fee instead. And I won't be proposing, by the way, both, or I'm not even sure if I'll be proposing one over the other. I'm just saying in general.
but coming to the comments that were made, I think, in terms of, it might have been the rebuttal, but the 3% applies to, of course, where you were at the particular time and the property coming in. And I've always argued that growth of paying its own way, actually, new development is paying more in taxes than what I'm paying on my house. But in fact, the houses are selling at a rate that is really becoming more and more comparable to the value of the property that I have that I'm paying taxes on. So I'm not sure that argument at this point in our economic development is true. It may be in the future, but
And there are many variables. A lot of folks here have astutely covered those and touched on them. There's even another variable, which is the degree to which new development can inspire an increase in existing tax base. And properly done and properly designed, I would say it can do that. It just depends on the development. Frankly, these are factors, as Ed has noted, and it's your call.
One of the reasons I mentioned the possible continuance is a suggestion by Ms. Kaczynski to bring in a report by the governor's office whether growth pays for itself. I don't know that report would be very meaningful to us. We're Oregon City, and we have to look at Oregon City specifically. I'm not sure if the commission feels it's in position to make a decision at this particular time or not, or whether there are certain things that have been brought up that would result in a desire to have a continuance.
I would like to see the governor's report. I don't know if I could determine whether I feel it has applicability to Oregon City without actually having it in front of me.
Okay.
So I think, and this is a very complex question, and I'd just like to mull it over. And so my preference would be to continue it, but my colleagues.
I'm good with it. I've had a lot of questions to answer tonight. My only question I still have is, Tony, can you tell me, before the two large annexations went down, how many annexations failed? Did they mostly all pass because they were smaller?
Every annexation passed in Oregon City.
Except for those two large ones.
Until we hit the large one brought by Mr. Ziegler, the second one brought by Mr. Ziegler, and the one brought by Ms. Holden.
Yeah. Okay. So, I don't know. I think it's up to the voters. I don't need a continuance myself.
It's kind of funny the way our rules are. We make a determination of whether it goes to the voters or not. If three of us voted, and well, in this case, well, it had to still be three. If three of us vote it not go to the voters then don't have the opportunity
Right.
to vote on it.
To-
So it's
to
only.
vote on it.
I mean, that's the kind of control in terms of whether the commission itself feels it ought to go to the voters. I'm actually going to support the continuance because, frankly, we've gotten a lot of information, and I would like to take some time with it myself. But we need a motion, and we need action on the motion to do this.
Well, if I can get my screen to work.
Mr.
I-
Mayor?
Yes.
Mr.
I
Mayor.
did make a request to speak.
Yes, go ahead.
and
I'm
this is-
sorry, I've got to get on the wrong thing.
Okay.
Yeah, you can.
I just have just a procedural thing for you to consider. We have to back up the timing for this to get it on the November ballot. And if I understood the city recorder correctly, the last date for her to submit is the 8th of September. Is that right? So that really makes the next meeting it.
Yes.
And notwithstanding the fact that, you want to make a decision at that time, there may be circumstances to continue, or you want to continue, or you want to look at something else, or you want to think it over. If you want to do this within the regular meeting schedule, you got to decide it at the next meeting, because we have to put out a ballot title. We have to put out the notice to the electors, and you're putting us in a position where it gets
Right,
more and
so
more difficult.
The motion should be to the specific date.
Yeah.
Continues to the next meeting.
I will move to continue item AN 11-01, consideration of a 6.5 acre annexation petition in the Park Place concept plan area, to the next regularly scheduled city commission meeting.
Do I have a second?
Yes, second.
Are you
Moved
going
and
to
seconded, moved by,
Are you going to ask for any more discussion after that?
well, yeah, I can. no.
Okay, because I'm on the
Yes, go ahead.
I'm on the screen too.
Yeah.
Mr. Conkle and I have been invited by Metro to go to Bellingham, Washington that day to talk to the city there about their waterfront redevelopment of their old mill site, and we're on a fact-finding mission because we've identified with them a number of conflicts that arose in their development that we want to try to avoid here with our Willamette Falls development. So unless the commission had a significant objection to that, we're planning on not being here for that meeting. So if you have
But you can do
questions-
the same thing we commissioners have done when we've been out of town.
We can absolutely do that.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to make the commission aware that we wouldn't be planning to be here in person. So if, in dependency between now and the time you take this up again, if you have questions that we can help you with, please don't wait.
No, I understand.
Sooner the better, so we can respond.
Lucky Scott.
Actually, it's going to be Lucky Pete.
What was it going to be, Lucky Pete? Well, I was thinking is Pete going to be sitting in your position?
No, actually,
That's what I meant, Lucky Scott.
Scott and Pete show you.
Yes. We have the motion by Commission President Nocita and seconded by Commissioner Roth. Roll call, please.
May I have my name on to speak?
Yeah.
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. I got to switch over. I'm still not in the right place. Well, I got to do something here. I close. I'm home.
He's stone.
Well, that's all right. I can look
That's
at you.
okay.
And I do have Nancy.
Okay.
And yes, you may speak.
I just want to make sure that you have all the facts.
Yes.
The meeting is on August 17th, and if you move it forward, then the notice would go out into the Oregonian in the next couple of days after that, and then the deadline would be the August 29th in order for the challenge process to be complete. So, I mean, for someone to file a challenge by the 29th. And then if there is a challenge filed, then you only have until August 30th until September 8th for it to be take it resolved through the courts. And the statutes actually says the court shall be conducted expeditiously to ensure the orderly and timely, processing of the ballot titles. So,
I think this is an important piece, and I understand the constraints that you're talking about, but
just wanted you to be aware.
I understand that, but if we're going to proceed with this annexation, we've had failures of a majority vote before. I can't predict what will happen, but it's difficult for me to see how the voters would vote in favor of an annexation when you have a substantially divided commission sending it to a vote of the voters. And if the desire is there for additional time to consider it, I think we need to do so. And I understand the time constraints, and I understand that it's probably going to put some more work on our city staff to do this in a timely fashion. I appreciate that, but the annexations have been regarded as a very important thing by this commission, and I think we have to go ahead and proceed with this personally. So I'll call for the vote.
Oh,
there's one more.
Oh, there's one more. Oh, sorry. And we have Betty Munn wishing to speak.
I just want to
Commissioner
know,
Munn.
do we hear new testimony then, or do we just...
We've closed. I should have said the public hearing was closed.
Oh,
but we
okay.
did close it.
If you're going to receive these two plans, that's not a closed record.
Okay. Can it be specific to those two? Or do we have to open everything up?
Well, yeah, and the applicant has to be able to respond.
No, I understand that, but...
Yeah, you could.
Well, I think our understanding could be the public hearing would be open only to what's presented, what we receive that's new.
Okay.
We can do that? Is that understood? Is that okay with the motioner and the seconder? Okay?
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Roth?
Aye.
Commissioner Nocita?
Aye.
Commissioner Mum?
Aye.
Mayor Neely?
Aye. Motion passed. That was aye all around, right? Motion passes unanimously. We'll continue on, and it really is I skipped the adoption of the agenda, but I'm sure somebody would have come back to me in terms. We got the second reading of Ordinance 1011-1008, granting telecommission franchise to TCG. We'll go into that, and now my thing is unhung. So, do we have an additional follow-up on the staff? Do we have a motion then to go for the second reading?
I move that we adopt the second reading and the final adoption of ordinance number 11-1008, granting a teleconferencing franchise to TCG Oregon to operate their right-of-way within Oregon City. Is that correct? Okay.
And this time I'll permit the city attorney to do the reading.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is ordinance 11-1008, an ordinance granting a telecommunications franchise to TCG Oregon to occupy certain rights-of-way within the city of Oregon City.
The roll call, please.
Commissioner Roth?
Aye.
Commissioner Nocita?
Aye.
Commissioner Mum?
Aye.
Mayor Neely?
Aye, passes unanimously. I failed to do the adoption of the agenda. Is there anything that anybody wants withdrawn from the consent agenda for an individual vote?
No.
Hearing none, do I hear a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Roth?
Aye.
Commissioner Nocita?
Aye.
Commissioner Mum?
Aye.
Mayor Neely?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-0.
Okay, now communications, city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a comment about the citizen comment tonight about due process. Just real briefly, we have 3 licensed attorneys here, only one acting in that capacity. Due process is what processes do, and what processes do in parking tickets is at municipal court. So the irony for me is a claim about due process by folks who are determined not to follow the process we provided. So I just couldn't escape that because while Mr. Hamilton has not called me regarding this incident and has not tried to set up a meeting with me, he also did not avail himself of the court process and refused to submit to the court's jurisdiction. So trying your case here, meeting after meeting, isn't, and I'm really not very hopeful that if the agenda is to just do that at each meeting, that there's going to be anything I can do in a meeting with that person to resolve the issue. But I will certainly try.
Yeah, no, I understand that.
Just to let you know. We also have an icon on our website called Filming in Oregon City, and it's actually under the city manager bracket on the menu. It doesn't have, though, all that historical data that Mr. Mabee suggested. So we'll be looking for volunteers. I think I've already gotten an email from somebody who might want to help over at Willamette Falls Media Center. So we'll, if they can. I know there are a lot of historians in our community that might be willing to help with that effort, and if we do get that information, I'm sure Nancy can find a way to get that on our website in some interesting fashion. Right. Also, I mentioned that Metro had invited me to go with them to Bellingham, Washington. This is going to be sort of we're looking for facts and snags and potential liabilities and difficulties that we might have in redeveloping, really at the staff level, trying to investigate every possible snag that we could hit in our own redevelopment here. And while this is primarily a staff-to-staff scenario that we're engaged in at this time, I'm hopeful, too, that we may be able to have more of an elected official field trip to some of these sites as we get closer to after we find out some of the staff level problems that we could encounter. Also, Metro has asked me about whether they actually asked me have all of our elected officials seen the site from the river. And Jim, aren't you notorious for being on boats that break down on the river? I think that's one of your claims to fame.
Yeah, but I think on that particular trip, everything was okay.
Okay, so they may let you on that trip as well. So we may be looking at something like that, and I don't know. My guess is we'd like to do that at a lower water level and probably when it's not pouring down rain, and that can be tricky later in the year. So we'll see what we can arrange there. But I thought it might really be compelling because I haven't seen it from the water level. My feeling is it may look a lot different, and it might offer us a whole different perspective that we would want to take advantage of. So we'll see what we can do with that. Also, in conjunction with Main Street Oregon City, we're going to be hosting a developer walk-around to encourage, and the tentative date for this is September 7th, to encourage investment and development and interest in our downtown. And these will be developers that Main Street has actually reached out to developers all through the metro area to try to get their interest in coming to Oregon City for this walk-around tour in the downtown. So we'll have a little welcome hosting event here in City Hall, and then there's going to be a walk-around tour once they firm up that date. But tentatively, it's September 7th. So I wanted you to know we were doing that in collaboration with Main Street, Oregon City. Let's see here. I think that's all I have, but we do have, one last thing from me and then something from Nancy Crushow. You recall a few meetings back, I talked to you about trying to go online with a more interactive customer service interface on our website that would allow people to make complaints or requests of the city online in a more comprehensive manner. We haven't gone live with that yet. We've been developing a lot of the protocols for it, and our IT staff have been meeting with the people on the front lines of our organization that would be responsible for dealing with those complaints. And as you all know, change is scary sometimes, especially if you're the one that's the most affected by it. So I've been determined that we take that on slowly enough so that the people that will be affected by it on our staff have a chance to cope with that and set up expectations and realities about how they're going to deal with it. To that end, I've asked David Knoll to come to a future council meeting. It's probably going to be within the next month to 6 weeks, and give you an actual demonstration of what a citizen would encounter on that website using that protocol. I think you'll be pretty fascinated by it, and it's a really good way to launch or inform the community as well as our elected officials about the power of this technology that we're going to be trying to use. I believe once people get used to it, that it'll make our government even more efficient than it already is. And it's going to be, I think, a fun thing for you to see. And it's called OC Request. And it'll be going live sometime immediately after we present it to you and show you what it can do. So that'll be coming up in the next couple of months. And then Nancy Krushauer has a couple of things.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. I wanted to provide 2 updates. One is we're going into construction season around town. We have the pavement management utility fund projects, which you have awarded the contracts for, but I just wanted to remind you that S2 Construction out of Aurora, Oregon will be starting our 2011 pavement project, and that'll probably be in the next few weeks. There are maps on our website, and I'll also be attaching a map to the Friday highlights, so you'll be able to look at it electronically, of the pavement rehabilitation projects, as well as the slurry seal and chip seal and micro seal projects. The announcement would be Friday. There will be chip seals being done by the county on Woodlawn and Swan, so that's a bit disruptive for those residents. The signs have been posted, the door hangers have been hung, and so there's been a big effort to make sure those folks are aware of it. The slurry seals are probably going to be another 3 or 4 weeks off, but again, many signs have already been posted alerting folks about the pavement management projects. The other thing, I know I've told you this time and time again, but just a reminder, the Main Street construction is going to be starting in about a week or 2. The pre-construction meeting is tomorrow morning, and so then we'll get their schedule following that. And I also have mentioned a few times, but I just want to remind you that the intersection of 10th and Main, in order to build the raised concrete intersection, which is really oriented towards pedestrians, we will need, we were hoping we wouldn't have to close the entire intersection at all, but that's really impractical when it comes to constructing concrete. So we will be keeping the Main Street flow open at all times, but we will be closing, if you're trying to go on 10th Street between 9090 and Singer Hill, that will be closed periodically to construct that intersection, and we'll have detour routes set up for that.
Are there specific days of the week that you're going to work on that to minimize the impact?
And specific times of day?
No, concrete has to cure for days and days on end to get the strength you need, and if we don't do it right with proper quality control, we won't have a good sustainable product. So we really need to let the contractor do that, and we have a layout for him so that they'll still keep 2 lanes open on Main Street, so you can go back and forth on Main Street. But if we want to get this concrete raised intersection constructed and constructed well, we have to not let people cross over Main Street. So
We had the antique fair, I believe, scheduled for the 28th. Is this going to impact the antique
no,
fair?
It'll be after the antique fair. We've
Okay.
we've made it very, very clear in the contract certain dates that cannot be impacting the
And
downtown.
there's the auto show in September as well.
Yeah.
And,
We've been working with downtown to get those
okay,
dates.
thank you.
So then I was also asked to provide an update on the Public Works Master Planning, and I've met with the real estate consultants to review the sites that were shortlisted, and they're working on gathering additional information for our review in site selection. And then, actually, at your August work session, which is next Tuesday, Maureen Cole and I will be coming in with our bond counsel to talk about the details about bonding in Oregon City, what types of bonds I'll be recommending for the library as well as Public Works. And it turns out that the bonds for a Public Works facility really are dependent on what the result of the water rate rollback is, because we can't use the water fund to back any bonds without certainty in our revenues. So in terms of that progression, we have been meeting with the Water Master Plan consultant, and we felt like in order to finish the master plan, we needed to provide three finance scenarios in that before we wanted to take it to the Planning Commission. And then the City Commission would ultimately decide or provide direction on, of those three scenarios, which one are we trying to achieve. One is status quo, that is existing rates, 3% increases in the future. The other one would be what we expect will happen in 2014 if we don't amend the charter, which is go back to 94 rates and assume a 3% increase over the years that we had actually adopted a 3% increase. And then the third scenario would be what are our actual needs. So considering that we are an old city and we really should be replacing water lines every 75 years, we need to understand our needs. Oftentimes utilities don't actually try to achieve their needs because politically it may not be very popular, but at least we want to know what they are so you can make a well-informed decision. And then with those scenarios and your decisions in mind, we would then be crafting the charter amendment to say, gosh, what do we really want for the water rates in Oregon City to look like? And we are going to be taking that master plan to the Planning Commission, their first meeting in October, and then bringing it to you thereafter. So what I guess I'm reporting is that we're kind of on parallel tracks here with the site selection and the real estate studying, and then the whole charter amendment, bonding, the charter amendment discussion so we can establish sustainable revenues for the water fund into the far future. And then we will be, of course, then at your work session next week, you'll be able to get more knowledge and information about preparing for some construction bonding. Does that answer your questions, Commissioner Roth?
I think so.
Okay.
It's a little complicated, but
I know. Did I start it out with it's a bit complicated?
Yeah, you did.
What exactly, if I may ask, is the agenda item for the work session?
What's it called, Nancy? Do you remember what it's called?
Yes.
Library bonding, public works bonding?
We just have bond council joins on strategizing for multiple bonding issues. Library, public works, water rates discussion.
Okay. I've had a citizen ask what's the status of the site selection search for Public Works. Will that be we'll get an update on that next at the work session?
No, the real estate consultants are working on it, and I wasn't planning on including that in the bonding discussion. I can call them and find out where they're at and maybe do an informal update.
I would appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you. Could I ask one last question of Nancy? I'm taking the train, as I've mentioned, for the Amtrak, and I've noticed a lot of construction on the depot site.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to have been undoing some stuff and then redoing some
Yeah,
stuff.
that's that ramp that didn't meet ADA standards.
Okay, the ramp didn't meet ADA
For
standards.
the ramp that was constructed initially, the contractor used. They had an error in their elevation of one of the ends of the ramp,
Okay.
so it ended up exceeding the 8.3%. So they had to redo it.
Well, I guess my question, the fiscal question is, I assume it was the contractor's mistake, so the contractor's...
And we've answered that question before.
Contractor's
Yes.
paying for it?
Mhm.
Okay, good. The Urban Renewal Agency, I think we approved in our budget interior work for the depot. Is there a timeline on that?
Well, we thought we'd finish the ramp. Right now, we're all pretty busy with all of these
Yeah.
other major
No, I was
things.
just...
But I was
just-
thinking, oh gosh, now that we're getting the ramp fixed, I need to start
Yeah.
working on seeking tenants and finding
Right.
out what kind of tenant improvements are needed. So it's in here and not quite ready to.
Okay.
But it's on the list,
Okay.
and I'll get some people working on that. Commissioner Nisita.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Last but not least, Ermitinger, you're not hearing a lot about it in the last 2 weeks because we're doing a lot of behind-the-scenes work on that. Probably going to require Doug and I to go on a trip or two, local trip, I should say, between here and Portland. Also, we're scurrying about looking everywhere we can for grants, really, to backfill. We've got a couple of pretty good-sized ones identified, and there are a number of smaller ones. As you may have surmised, particularly at the federal and state level, where most of those used to come from, the dollars are even more scarce than they've ever been, but we're working tirelessly behind the scenes to try to make some more things happen there. I believe Mayor Neely was suggested that the Urban Renewal Commission may want to provide a match to the 125 figures that we've already supplied, and you have the commission does have the contingency amounts there to match that if they decide to do that. So that'll probably be on a future agenda item. And then, Mayor, you started tonight with the Growers Market, and I went there today, and I cannot believe that they have these blueberries that are as big as some of the vegetables in my home state. So,
unlike the size of people, size is not necessarily
an indication of flavor.
Indication of quality. No.
The farmers market in Oregon City is open, and they have these. So, Mr. Conkle has one last thing.
One update. You may recall that we brought forward the certified local government work that we were doing on the inventory of the existing homes in Oregon City. And then we had identified several homes that could potentially be listed on the National Register, and we were going to do that work. Unfortunately, none of the private property owners decided to take that option. So the Historic Review Board recommended that we work with, and they move forward with, doing the narrative description and the intensive survey for the elevator and the promenade. So there's two parts to that, is the narrative description, which we would have the consultant doing with the remaining money from the CLG for those two, for the promenade and the elevator, and then that would get us in a good spot, and staff could then work on the background history and the context statement associated with that. So those were the two public facilities that that HRB identified, and we will be moving forward with those, if that sounds good.
That's all we have.
Okay, got the mayor's report. I'll first ask a question. If I can talk about the work session that we had with Westland yesterday. Is there any one of the commissioners that I'll give a brief report, but I would suggest that after I give that, I'll open it up to the other commissioners that were there. Okay, and then I'll go on to my other items. There was a work session between the county facilitated work session that we probably didn't need a county facilitator there, but that was.
I was kind of surprised she was there.
Well, she was invited.
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
think that was fine. But we had the work session between the city commission and of our city commission and the city council of West Lynn, looking at two proposals that have been put forward for services, one by Willamette Falls Cable Access and the other by Metro
Map.
Communications
Metro Area Communications Commission that is that provides services predominantly in Washington County. They made their presentations. We had discussions about the services currently provided by MAC, the budgetary situation in the respective cities, and the basic thing that we made no decisions at that particular time of who we wanted as a service provider. The pros and cons were presented on both sides. I would say there's as much uncertainty about the services MAC would provide as there are any other. However, MAC has a very short timeline in order to renew its agreement with Comcast and to include any other service entities that might be there. It was suggested that we have some separate work sessions within our respective councils, and then we come back to a joint work session. I can see that we're going to get swamped with work sessions. However, I think we need to proceed on this one with some due diligence, even if we're going to have it on a special day.
I think we already have, the reporter has that on your calendar already.
Next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday.
Discussion.
Okay, very good. Okay.
The 9th.
Yes.
All right, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. Commissioner Roth and Commissioner Mum were at those. We had to leave the National Night Out ceremony at Chapin early, like we were only there for about a half an hour. So, do you want to make some more comments in terms of any detail?
My only comment was that I requested of Nancy tonight, Mr. Holliday suggested that the city had access or had been given numbers as far as to the number of people that use equipment and produce shows and all that kind of stuff for both cities. And I need that information to make my decision.
We'll include that with your backup material for the work
Very
session.
good. Commissioner Mum, anything else that you would like to say based on the meeting?
No, it was very informal. I mean, very informational.
Yes, it was. Okay. With that, let me continue on a couple of other things. One that I failed to do at the last commission meeting was to announce the vacancies that we have on other meetings, but that's okay because it's changed substantially from that time. We still have one vacancy on the Budget Committee. I don't know if we've received any applications. We've got one that I thought was going to be coming forward based on a discussion with a citizen, I believe is in the audience. Oregon City Civic Improvement Trust, one vacancy. Metro Enhancement Committee, one vacancy. These are not particularly critical vacancies to fill immediately, simply because we won't be doing anything with those until next year. The Natural Resource Committee, we now have 4 applications in. Normally what I do, with the exception of the Budget and the Enhancement Committees, I have interviews done by the respective advisory or boards or commissions. I sit in on those interviews normally. I generally follow the recommendations of those bodies in terms of their interviews. Natural Resource Committee is a little different because there's no committee to do the interviews. My recommendation, Mr. Conkle, I'm correct in that Peter Walter is going to be the staff person assigned to this. My suggestion, and if it's okay with the Commission President, is to have myself and the Commission President and Peter Walter do the interviews of the applicants. Is that okay with you? Mm-hmm. Okay. And 4 applicants, I think, really is a basis for us doing the interviews. If and I know 3 of them are excellent, but we can convene, I think, this committee if we have a majority of the seats filled. And of course, we're going to encourage other people to apply to the Natural Resource Committee, but I don't want to hold off on this too long. So my suggestion is that we go ahead and schedule interviews with the particular staff person and the 2 of us being the interviewers. All right. A couple other things. I am attending some affordable housing meetings held by the county. They're basically setting up recommendations to the county commission in terms of what should be looked at in terms of services provided by school districts and so forth for the best locations of affordable housing. I made the comment earlier on that there are not going to be federal monies available for grant requests. The kind of the history of seeking grants from the federal government for good projects is you get turned down the first time, you get accepted on the second one. They got turned down on the first one. They anticipated that would be the case. It's kind of the normal process. And now the funds aren't available, and there's not going to be a second request. So was it 200 units? Is that right, Mr. Cockle? Plan for the Park Place area?
It was 200 additional, so it's 300 total.
Yeah, 200 additional. Right. And those monies are unlikely to be available in the foreseeable future. The other thing I wanted to comment on was that the Metro Advisory Committee, it doesn't meet every scheduled Wednesday. It depends upon the issues that are before the Metro Council, where you serve as an advisory committee. But they try to, on those times that we don't meet, they try to schedule other activities that people can go to. And one of them was a visit to the Lentz Urban Renewal District in Portland. And so I went on that particular tour. Very informative. It was kind of interesting to see what they were doing. And it occurred to me as going through it, since they're looking at, doing these tours to a large extent in urban renewal districts. I think it would be great to have Main Street, Oregon City, serve as a tour location, and so I am going to suggest. I'm going to talk to Mr. Purdy and so forth. But I'm going to, if he's agreeable, I'm going to suggest to Metro that actually Main Street be part of their tour.
Oh, that'd be a great idea.
I think that's really all I have to report on, isn't it, Nancy? As far as you know, did I miss anything? Okay. Any other comments by the other commissioners? Everybody wants to go home. It's almost 11 o'clock.
I wanted to find out how the other parking study meeting went. I did go to the first parking study meeting, the one in the evening. How was
the other one being the one in
the morning? The morning one?
It went well. We had last week we had two separate meetings about the parking study implementation, and at both meetings we had around 25 people, which I thought was a decent amount. And there were some lively discussions and good questions and feedback. But yeah, it went well.
Okay.
So I don't know if there were any specific points.
No,
or
I just wondered if the morning group was having issues with the parking meters too.
No, no, I would say not.
Okay.
In that meeting. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That's it.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
You don't need motion.
You just need your gavel.
Adjourn! You don't want to knock out the